In most missing people cases, the last photo ever taken of a person before they vanished without a trace is an unnerving and creepy image in retrospect, even if what they were doing looked normal in the photo at the time that it was caught on camera. For that reason alone, these scary pictures have horrifying backstories that simply shouldn't exist. There have been many instances where people unwittingly capture what they believe to be a ghost on camera. And strangely, many of these happened while a picture was being taken of someone sitting in some form of transport. One such example comes from a photo taken in England in 1959 by a woman named Mabel Chenery. At the time, Mabel's husband was sitting in the driver's seat of his car when she decided to snap a picture of him. But when the film was developed and she took a closer look, she was shocked to see the image of her mother sitting in the back seat. What makes the image even creepier is the fact that the couple had just visited Mabel's mother's grave, and she believes that her mother may have wanted to go on one last car journey in the seat that she used to sit in while she was alive. The photo was analyzed by an expert who at first thought it may merely be a reflection in the car's window, or that it may be a case of double exposure. But he soon stated that he would stake his reputation that the photo wasn't faked in any way. There is always the possibility that the photo was merely a hoax, or that the ghostly figure was indeed caused by some sort of reflection. But none of these theories have been proven, and many people have accepted that it does in fact show a spirit sitting in the car's back seat. In 2018, a 15-year-old boy named Troy Vance decided to grab his camera when he noticed a particularly beautiful sunrise, and while doing so, he decided to include a truck in the picture since he liked the way it looked against the sunrise. He then uploaded the photo to Facebook, but was surprised when some of his friends started commenting that there was something ominous hiding in the photo, and he decided to take a closer look. As he zoomed in, he saw what everyone was talking about: the ghostly apparition of a young boy sitting inside the truck. Troy confirmed that there was no one in the truck at the moment that he took the photo, and is convinced that he managed to capture a spirit on camera. But one of the more convincing instances of a spirit being photographed inside a vehicle is this image that was taken in 1987 by a woman known as Mrs. Sayer while she was visiting the Fleet Air Arm Museum at the Royal Navy Air Station in England. At one point during this visit, Mrs. Sayer decided to have her photo taken in the cockpit of a helicopter that was being used during the Falkland War, but was then obviously no longer in any condition to be flown. She climbed aboard on her own and asked a friend to take the photo, but when the film was developed, she inspected it closely and realized there was someone in the cockpit with her, though this should have been impossible since she was certain that the helicopter was empty at the time. At first, she thought that it may be a case of double exposure, but the more she looked at the photo, the more convinced she became that it was the image of a man sitting next to her, rather than her own. Many people who have inspected the photo state that they can see a man wearing a white-collared shirt, and what's taken most people by surprise is the remarkable clarity of the alleged apparition. The man also seems to be looking over at Mrs. Sayer, or possibly at the person taking the photo, leading many people to believe that the spirit was fully aware that a photo was being taken, suggesting a slight mischievous personality. What makes the photo even stranger is the fact that there have been no reported hauntings at the Fleet Air Arm Museum, and that the helicopter was never flown by anyone who lost their lives while at the helm. There have been suggestions that the spirit belonged to a pilot who passed away long after the war ended, and that he likes to visit the museum from time to time. But not everyone is convinced, and many skeptics have pointed out that there's no definitive way to prove that the image isn't actually a reflection, or that there wasn't someone sitting next to Mrs. Sayer when the photo was taken. To those who believe, though, it's a ghostly mystery that continues to baffle the mind 36 years later. Pictured here is the Haw Par Villa in Singapore, the horror movie of amusement parks. It's the polar opposite of the fun, exciting, and children-friendly Disneyland. It's home to thousands of odd statues, each stranger than the last. Legends state that the wax statues that depict the souls of the condemned come to life at night. It's said to be the weirdest tourist attraction in the world, with statues of half crab, half humans, and a feature known distinctly as Hell's Museum. The villa is said to be a journey through Chinese legends, mythology, and folklore. The amusement park can be found on a hill in Pasir Panjang and was the creation of a Myanmar businessman, Aw Boon Ha. He'd made this attraction for his brother, Aw Boon Par. The park was once referred to as the Tiger Balm Gardens, after the tiger balm medical ointment that the siblings' father had made. After the 1937 construction, the villa was open to the public and was a clear reflection of Boon Ha's passion for culture and mythology. He'd supervised the artisans who made many of the original fixtures. When the war had begun, the whole family would flee the area and move to Yangon. During this time, the park would be used as an observation point for the Japanese army. Upon their return from the 1940s to the 1970s, various family members would contribute to the development of the attraction, which included the creator's son. Thereafter, it became the home of otherworldly experiences. It's known for its incredibly vivid depictions of the 10 courts of hell from Chinese folklore. Aside from this, there are thousands of statues and 150 dioramas that depict some rather surreal scenes from Chinese literature, which include Madame White Snake, the 8 Immortals, and the Journey to the West. As mentioned, the villa is rife with stories of ghosts. One such story stated that a few mediums had crept in one night and had taken part in trances, but the spirits that were summoned were not sent off, but instead entered a few of the statues. It's also claimed that those statues were later moved to a hidden bunker. Some have reported hearing piercing screams deep in the night and have seen the statues come to life, including the snake found at the entrance. One of the haunting legends connected to this place also stated that the 10 courts of hell would suck the nighttime visitors into the burning depths. 2 of the legends were put to the test by some journalists who spent the night in the park. During the day, the place is terrifying enough and would likely be far worse at night, and that it was. The 2 legends were that of statues coming to life, and the other, the 10 courts that would suck in the evening visitors. 4 individuals had been invited for a walk through the park one evening, and upon their arrival, one of the external camera lights would immediately begin to flicker. The multimedia producer, Isaac Neto, stated that nothing like this had happened before, and he checked the light settings. During the first test, the team would venture into the darkest corners of the park, but the moment they began to set up their tripods, one of the camcorders began to act strangely. The flash had flickered a few times, which would usually require someone to press the button. The team sat in isolation and complete silence, but observed no living statues. What one of them had experienced, though, was an unseen brush across her arm. Once they reviewed the footage, they noticed some glowing arms. During the second test, the camera that had been set up to record stopped recording. This would be the 3rd time that perfectly working equipment would act up. Upon their departure, the team spoke with the security guard, who'd only worked there for a month. He told them that he'd already gotten used to the paranormal encounters. He smiled before stating that after a while, one learns to make friends there, and promptly returns to his post. Aside from being featured in the story, as was so written by Bokusen, this blob can also be found in depictions by Gazu Hiyaki Yagyo, who drew it near a temple surrounded by nirachive, a food that was taboo in the Buddhist cuisine because of the powerful aroma. This may be connected to the tale in which the yokai is also a food delicacy. This creepy-looking photo looks something like a still from a low-budget sci-fi program. In actuality, the man in the mask is the person many people believe triggered the start of the Cold War. Igor Guzenko was born in 1919 in Russia. He was academically gifted at a young age and trained as a Cipher clerk. When the Soviet Union joined the Second World War, his skills were in high demand. He earned a position working in Canada and brought his pregnant wife along with him. Life in Canada was good for Igor and his family, much better than they would have had it in the Soviet Union. When the war ended, Igor's work didn't. The Soviet Union had been spying on Western allies during the war, and that was still continuing. But when Igor received a message saying he was being brought back to Russia, he began to worry. He feared he had done something wrong and would face severe punishment back home. Even if that wasn't the case, he didn't want to return to the relatively difficult life faced by the people living in the Soviet Union. So he did what he felt he needed to do. Over the course of several weeks, he moved hundreds of papers from his office back to his apartment. On the night of his final day in the office, he went to the local newspaper and tried to reveal the Soviet spy ring that was in operation in Canada. The reporters there didn't believe him and told him to go to the RCMP. Igor had been reluctant to go there, fearing Soviet spies had already infiltrated the police force. But by that point, he didn't feel like he had a choice. The RCMP didn't believe him at first, but when Soviet officers raided Igor's home, they realized he was telling the truth. Luckily, Igor and his wife had thought ahead and were staying with a neighbor when the raid occurred. Igor handed over his files and revealed the extent of the Soviet espionage in Canada and the US. The Gozinkos were given new identities and lived the rest of their lives in Canada. Igor eventually had 8 children and managed to keep his true identity a secret, even to his youngest children. He spent the rest of his life extremely paranoid, knowing that the Soviet government wanted to take him out. Still, he conducted a number of interviews but did so while wearing this creepy-looking mask or hood, with only his eyes and mouth visible, in an effort to keep his identity a secret. When discussing Western movies, one of the most iconic films that's usually mentioned is Tombstone, which contains some of the greatest characters from Days Gone. In reality, the town of Tombstone, which is located in Arizona, is rumored to be one of the most haunted places in the Old West, and it's thought that many of the spirits that dwell there are those of people who lost their lives to outlaws, disease, and general lawlessness. One of its most haunted attractions is the Birdcage Theater, which back in the day served not only as a theater but as a saloon, gambling area, and brothel. It's said that as many as 26 people lost their lives in the theater for various reasons, and many visitors have reported seeing the spirits of the deceased still roaming around the building. Some claim to have heard disembodied laughter, smelled phantom cigarette smoke, and even heard the sound of a piano playing in the same way that it would have been done in the days of the Old West. Apparitions have been seen in the area that are described as wearing clothing dating back to the 1800s, confirming in many people's minds that these are indeed the ghosts of people who lived in the area during that time. There are also rumors that Fremont Street, which is located close to the OK Corral, is haunted thanks to a battle that was fought between Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp, along with Doc Holliday, against a set of outlaws that was made up of Billy Claiborne, Wes Fuller, Ike and Billy Clanton, as well as the McLaury brothers Frank and Tom. Many people have reported seeing the spirit of a man named James Burnett, who was also known as Justice Jim, thanks to his position of Justice of the Peace in Pierce, Arizona, walking in the area of the OK Corral. They believe it to be Jim's ghost since he lost his life there during a shootout. Schieffelin Hall served as a theater and opera house back in the day, and it's yet another tombstone building that's said to contain the spirits of people who perished there. Some people have reported hearing the sound of chains being dragged across the building's floor, while others claim to have seen a specter, believed to be that of an actress who performed in the building at one point. Much of the eerie activity that's been noticed in the building seems to be concentrated backstage, further bolstering the theory that many of these spirits belong to the actors and actresses who once performed there. There is, however, very little evidence that these hauntings are true, but this can't be said for another site in Tombstone that's said to contain spirits, namely the Boot Hill Cemetery, where this photo was taken in 1996. The image seems innocent enough, as it shows a man dressed up like a cowboy, posing for the camera while brandishing a firearm. He's looking directly at the camera with a sullen expression on his face, but it's what can be seen behind him that has left many people baffled and terrified to visit the area. A short distance away in the background, the image of another man can be seen, but strangely only the top part of his body is visible, leading many people to believe that this is a ghost that was caught on camera, as it appeared behind the man in the foreground. The photo was taken by Ike Clanton, who has repeatedly stated that there was no one else in the area when he took the photo of one of his friends. No one noticed the strange figure in the background until Ike's friend took a closer look at it about 2 weeks later, and he immediately called Ike to explain what he had found. The man in the background looks like he's wearing a flat-brimmed hat with a light-colored shirt, but Ike insists that he wasn't visible at the time the photo was taken. Ike noticed that the apparition seemed to be looking in the direction of Clanton and the McLaury brothers' graves, and many people believe that he may have been someone who was involved in the shootout that took place at Fremont Street. While many people believe the photo to have been manipulated, It's been scrutinized by many experts over the years, and none have been able to find any evidence that it was tampered with. Others think that it isn't actually a spirit, but a mannequin that was placed there intentionally, though this hasn't been proven either, and it's generally accepted in the area that this is the apparition of a long-forgotten cowboy who still walks around the cemetery, even during the day. This image of a bell depicts an image very similar to those of other bells found on shipwrecks. But this bell was once aboard a ship called the Whydah Galley, which has an interesting and somewhat sordid history. Even after it eventually sank, the ship became the stuff of legends, as it was rumored to be carrying a massive haul of treasure. But no one knew exactly where it sank, and speculation began to run rife. The 100-foot-long Whydah Galley was originally intended to be used as a slave ship when it was constructed in 1715. But this was thankfully never to be, as it never made it to its intended destination during its maiden voyage. Soon after setting out from Jamaica, the ship was set upon by a pirate known as Samuel Bellamy, also known as Black Sam, whose crew took control of the vessel and put it to good use, pirating several other ships as they made their way to Wellfleet, Massachusetts. The ship was now rumored to be loaded with the treasures that were plundered from other ships, and upon making landfall, the crew and captain would share in the spoils, making them very rich men indeed. But that's when tragedy struck. On the 26th of April in 1717, the ship had hailed within visual distance of the shore and was likely getting ready to approach. But the crew had been drinking heavily, and found themselves struggling to steer the vessel against the strong winds that were reaching up to 70 miles per hour. This resulted in swells as high as 30 feet that battered the side of the ship, further hampering any efforts to take it back under control. The ship would finally strike a sandbank, causing it to rupture and sink beneath the violent waters. As soon as news of the wreck began to spread, it became clear that the treasure was up for grabs to whoever dared to enter the water, and many people started making their way to the area in hopes that they could collect their share. Colonial Governor Samuel Shute ordered a cartographer and colonial naval commander by the name of Cyprian Southack to locate the ship's wreckage and to collect as much of the sunken treasure as he could, so that it could be taken back to England. Upon reaching the area, Southack reported that as many as 200 people had gathered over a 20-mile stretch of the shore to collect as much of the treasure that had washed ashore as possible, after the ship had flipped over in the water and he was only able to collect a small amount of valuables. Not everyone was convinced that the ship really contained anything of value, but one of the crew members stated that 180 bags of gold and silver, 20 tons of ivory, and a large amount of jewels had been taken from other ships and were still aboard the Whydah Galley, after it had been divided up equally amongst its pirate crew. But the ship itself was lost beneath the water, and for the next 250 years or so, many treasure hunters searched for it and speculated where it could be located, but without any success. That's until 1984, when a treasure hunter named Barry Clifford believed that he had finally found the ship's wreckage off the coast of Cape Cod. Clifford had heard about the sunken treasure when he was a child growing up in Cape Cod, and had always dreamed of finding it one day. Upon locating the wreck of the ship, he was still uncertain that it was the Whydah Galley, but he and his crew soon started finding coins and gold that dated to the correct time period, and he started to believe that he'd finally found what he was looking for. But his suspicions were only confirmed when the ship's bell was found, and upon closer inspection, they noticed an inscription that read the Whydah Galley 1716, confirming that they had indeed solved the mystery of the ship's location, and that it wasn't a mere legend. Along with the gold and silver that was found, Clifford's crew also salvaged thousands of other artifacts from the wreckage, many of which were now housed at the Expedition Whydah Sea Lab and Learning Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts. They were also fortunate enough to find more than 20 cannons that were taken by Bellamy from plundered ships during his reign of terror on the open sea, and it's expected that more artifacts will be uncovered, as more treasures are found with each expedition to the wreckage. To this day, the Whydah Galley remains the only authenticated pirate shipwreck that's ever been recovered, and its legend is set to live on for many years to come. On May 9th of 2020, Suzanne Morphew sent a final photo to a man she was having an affair with. It was a simple bikini photo, but one that would have a creepy backstory. The next day, she was reported as a missing person, and her unsolved mystery began. Suzanne was a married mother of 2 living in Colorado with her husband Barry. Both of them were seeing other people. Before she went missing, she told Barry she wanted a divorce, but Barry apparently wanted to try to salvage the relationship. She and Barry were getting food at a neighboring town. According to Barry, she was still asleep when he left the house on May 10th to go to Broomfield, where he had a construction job. His daughters were on a camping trip and had sent a text wishing their mother a happy Mother's Day. When she didn't respond, they asked Barry if everything was all right. Barry asked a neighbor to check in on his wife. The neighbor found both Suzanne and her bike missing and reported it to authorities. Suzanne's bike was later found the same day on the side of a cliff near the family home. However, there was no sign of Suzanne nearby. Searches of the area have turned up nothing, and police suspect she may not have gone for a bike ride at all. Barry became the prime suspect. Part of his story didn't add up, and investigators discovered he'd made multiple stops to dump trash on his way to the construction job. They also discovered creepy text messages from Suzanne before she went missing, telling her sister how Barry had become physical with her. Barry denied this and claimed it was in self-defense. He has made multiple appeals for whoever was responsible for this crime to bring Suzanne home. Barry was arrested and charged with taking his life's wife, but the charges were dropped a few months later. DNA from an unknown male was found in Suzanne's car, on her bike and helmet. It was a partial match to a man convicted of crimes elsewhere in the country. Police do not believe Suzanne is still alive, but are appealing for information that'll solve this strange missing person case. First, someone looking at this photo of the Church of San Juan Parangarin might wonder why people decided to create a building in such an isolated area. But this church was actually in the middle of a village, which now lies beneath the surface. Up until 1943, there was nothing unusual about the village. But in February of that year, villagers began to feel a rumbling, and allegedly a deep chasm appeared in the ground. By this point, villagers and another nearby village began to evacuate. 9 days after the rumbling began, what would become Parakuten began to erupt. This was a completely new volcano and actually emerged in the middle of a cornfield. This type of volcano doesn't typically have a volatile eruption, but for the next 10 years, it slowly spread lava around the surrounding areas. The villagers had plenty of time to evacuate, and they would occasionally come back to look at the slowly spreading lava. It took a year for the volcano to melt the stone wall that surrounded the church graveyard, but it eventually found its way in. The lava slowly spread over the graves and reached the church walls. Over the years, the lava piled high enough that it eventually covered almost the entire village. The only thing that remained was the very top of the church. Remarkably, the altar remained intact. Today, the old church is something of a tourist spot, and many make a pilgrimage to the site. It's strange to imagine an entire town lying beneath your feet as you walk to the structure. Nobody had their life taken during this eruption, and the villagers created a new settlement nearby. The families of those who escaped the eruption tell stories about how the elders believed that the end of the world had come. The most haunted castle in Scotland is the 12th century Edinburgh Castle, which is subject to a lengthy history. It had been the site of various battles, as well as political upheaval. The souls of soldiers and prisoners are said to still haunt this building today. Many have reported feeling a presence and have seen apparitions throughout the castle. The site has been the home to people since the Iron Age and has played an important role in serving as a royal residence, a stronghold, and a prison. In 1566, the Queen of Scots had birthed her son, James VI, after which it would play a role in the wars of Scottish independence. English forces captured the building in 1650. In the midst of the Jacobite Rising in the 1700s, it was used as military barracks. While it's most known for its incredibly rich history and astonishing architecture, it's also infamous for its paranormal ongoings. Visitors have seen many ghostly figures during their castle explorations. One story suggested that a piper was sent to explore the tunnels that lie beneath the great building, but was never seen again. Thereafter, many have documented the song of a lone bagpipe emitting from the tunnels, even though no piper has performed there for centuries. Another otherworldly wanderer is the drummer, who's said to not have a head. He's said to haunt the dungeons where he was kept imprisoned for spying. The sounds of drums have been heard by the guests, and a figure has occasionally been spotted. But it's uncertain if this is the drummer. The legend states that should he be seen again, the castle will once again be under attack. The apparition wanders the halls in search of his lost drumsticks, according to the story. While there have been many attempts to debunk such a story, it remains an intriguing attraction at the castle. Other ghosts include the Grey Lady and the story of the Black Hound. The Grey Lady was accused of witchcraft. Upon her passing, her spirit was said to have traveled back to the place that was once her home, the Edinburgh Castle. She's often seen wandering the hallways. Within the walls of the historical site, there's a small cemetery that was used to bury the pets of the soldiers who inhabited the castle for some time. There have been reports of a white or black spectral hound that's associated with the gravesite. He's either seen or heard around the area and is believed to either be Fido, Topsy, Jip, or Yum Yum. A lesser seen spectral entity is that of the man in a leather apron. A research investigation was carried out by Dr. Richard Wiseman, who found 240 volunteers who'd not known of the Edinburgh Castle hauntings, and placed them in the castle for 10 days. One reportedly had a burning sensation on their arm, and others felt watched during the course of the project. It was also reported by a few of the volunteers that they'd seen a man in a leather apron. He would appear randomly in the castle vaults, casually walking through the doorway. The Edinburgh Castle is haunted by 6 main souls: the Grey Lady, the unluckiest prisoner, the piper, the drummer, the man in the leather apron, and the ghostly good boy, leading it to be one of the most haunted castles in Scotland. Who would have thought that the oldest image of a ghost would have been an engraving from 2,500 to 3,500 years ago? A Babylonian clay tablet was discovered and is believed to be the oldest image of a ghost. The spirit is that of an elderly male who's being guided back to the underworld by a female figure. The tablet was given to the British Museum on the 3rd of November in 1883 and was found to date back to the 4th century BC. The tablet is incomplete due to the damage it had sustained during excavation, but it's believed that its purpose seems clear as to what the ancient civilizations believed about spirits. The scribe of the artifact detailed the layout of a spell and ritual that apprentice exorcists may use to dispel the phantoms. The engraving shows a slender, bearded man with bound wrists. He's tied to a rope which is being held firmly by the guide, who leads him back to where he belongs. He's also said to be looking quite miserable. The image and its cuneiform inscription were deciphered by a senior curator at the British Museum's Middle East Department, Dr. Irving Finkel. He explained that the spirit was restless and was quite taken with women. To rid the family of the wandering spirit, an exorcist created a female partner whose job was to lead him away. Only the first couple of words of the entirety of the spell have survived. It can be translated from Babylonian to mean Shamash, Lord of the Broad. Shamash was the sun god of ancient Mesopotamia. As a divine judge, he would also directly associate with the underworld, which is likely why he would be summoned during such a ritual. According to the curator, the tablet is only part of a guide that was used in exorcisms, and one can only see the image if it's viewed from above and under a light. Aside from calling on Shamash, the exorcist also needs to make figurines of both a man and a woman. 2 vessels of beer need to be prepared, and at sunrise, the ritualistic words must be spoken. The idea is for the ghost to be turned into one of the figurines, with the last line being "not look behind you." The warning is thought to be aimed at the figurines that enter the underworld, but could also possibly be a warning for the exorcist who performs the ritual. It's thought that the drawing was carried out by a master craftsperson who was skilled in clay drawings. It's thought that the guide would be held in the exorcist's library or possibly their temple. Finkel explained that one probably won't give it a second thought when they first look at it, as it looks like there's no writing. But when placed under a lamp, the figures leap out, suddenly becoming quite plainly visible. It's small enough to fit in one's hand, but at least half of the original guide is missing. The curator had also written a book that focused on Mesopotamia after reading a history of ghosts which had started in the 18th century. In early civilizations, the people would expect to encounter spirits and ancient chroniclers such as Pliny, Plautus, and Lucian, who would all reference phantoms in their writing. Some such observers would also leave instructions on how to get rid of certain types of spirits. Mesopotamians would rely upon funerary rituals to prevent those who passed on from rising again. Spirits would often be considered objects of sympathy, since they were being deprived of eternal rest. To appease the ghosts, a school of specialist magic would be required, which would send them back to the underworld and prevent them from causing any further trouble. In this culture, the souls would return and manifest as a sickness among the living. While they were viewed with sympathy, they simply could not stick around. Doctors would bring in exorcists to dispel them before continuing further treatment of those who'd fallen ill. The ancient tablet was rediscovered in the museum vault and had never been displayed previously. The white lines in the image are traces that had been done by James Fraser and Chris Cobb for Irving Finkel's The First Ghosts. Ghosts, hauntings, demons, and aliens are not entirely new concepts, it appears. The Book of Good Manners is a manuscript that was written by Jean-Duc de Berry, the younger brother of King Charles V of France. It provides text relating to moral behavior and ethical values. This illustration can be found within the copies of the guide and is also a topic of discussion among ufologists. The image of the goddess of luck, the personification of Fortuna. She's depicted with her spinning wheel and is accompanied by a large sphere that hovers randomly in the middle. The golden spherical object is said to be Fortuna's orb, identified by the characteristics of it being divided into 3 parts by intricate decoration, as a reference to the T and O map, which depicts the world as a circle of water. But according to ufologists, this orb is an alien spacecraft. History fans would know of the theory of the ancient astronauts that are depicted in cave paintings, ancient books, and even paintings. Such theorists have suggested the presence of ancient aliens in medieval art, and this manuscript was not an exception. This book had been created in 1388, which already disproved the theory that the sphere was a balloon, since no such device had been invented as of yet. Behind the floating orb, a fleet of unknown objects accompany it, with what appear to be rays of light pointing downward, consistent with the standard idea of UFOs. Additionally, one of the noblemen appears to be startled by the appearance of it. Others have suggested that the golden orb is a representation of the sun or the wheel of fortune. This was not the only illustration that was thought to depict the coming of aliens, though. To name a few others that have been under investigation by alien experts: the Miracle of Snow, the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, Triumph of Summer Tapestry, and the 1710 painting of the Baptism of Christ. 3 historical works, along with the Book of Good Manners, may be the depictions of early encounters with the third kind. While there have been a few theories and suggestions as to what the hovering ball might be, it appears that it's been figured out by the UFO experts of the world. It appears that alien visitations have been around since before medieval times, since many ancient civilizations had also drawn various pictures describing things they had seen. Located in Sydney, Australia, Luna Park opened its gates in 1935. Modeled after the popular Coney Island amusement park in New York, Luna Park offered family-friendly activities to its patrons, such as carnival-style games, deep-fried foods, and rides. One of these rides, the Ghost Train, was particularly popular amongst Luna Park visitors. The roller coaster-style attraction carried its passengers through a haunted building and along a track complete with plenty of drops, twists, and turns to entice thrill seekers of all ages. On the evening of June 9, 1971, disaster struck when the Ghost Train amusement ride caught fire, killing 7 people. Among the victims were John Godson and his 2 young sons, Craig and Damien. The Godson family were on the last day of a planned family vacation when they decided to visit Luna Park. As the evening began to come to a close and their tickets dwindled, Craig and Damien decided they wanted to ride the Ghost Train one more time before leaving. With their father in tow, the family boarded the train, while Jenny, the children's mother, stayed behind to get some ice cream. Screams were not an uncommon sound heard from the ride, so when shrieks were heard coming from within the attraction's haunted building, they were initially ignored. It wasn't until smoke and flames began to billow from the building that employees realized there was something very wrong. Sadly, when Jenny returned, she learned that her husband and 2 children were amongst the 7 people who had tragically perished in the fire. Jenny Godson would later develop a film role from the family's vacation. Among these photos is the last photo ever taken of Damien Godson. In the photo, Damien can be seen standing next to a man dressed in a bizarre costume. According to Jenny, the photo was taken just prior to the accident when the man had silently approached the family before placing his hand on Damien's shoulder. Believing the man was simply an actor, Jenny snapped the photo. It was later learned, however, that there were no actors in employment at the park that day. Some believe he was nothing more than a street performer. Others compare the unusual man's appearance to that of Malak, a deity associated in biblical sources with child sacrifice. Whatever the case may be, both the cause of the fire and the identity of the mysterious horned man remain unknown. Tsunamis are some of the most destructive forces of nature, as they're known to destroy anything in their path in a matter of mere seconds. In many cases where tsunamis hit built-up areas, buildings have been destroyed, vehicles have been carried off as if they're nothing more than tinder, and roads have been left virtually unrecognizable. A magnitude 9.0 tsunami that hit Japan in March of 2011 proved no different when it caused widespread destruction after an earthquake occurred about 90 miles from the coast and around 19 miles beneath the sea floor. The tsunami had some unexpected consequences, as the Fukushima nuclear power plant's backup generators were damaged by the force of the tsunami waves, resulting in one of the worst nuclear disasters on record to date. This image of a ship at sea may seem normal, but quite unbelievably, it's also the result of that very same tsunami, though to most people it seems almost tranquil, as if a smokestack ship is quietly making its way across the ocean towards its intended destination. But the reality of this photo is far more unnerving when it's revealed that this ship, the Ryo Unmaru, was moored at Hokkaido in Japan when the tsunami struck, dislodging it and sending it floating aimlessly out to sea with a further 1.5 million tons of debris from the shore. Luckily, no one was aboard the ship at the time, as it was slated to be sent for scrapping by its owner, who, when contacted after the ship was located, stated that he didn't want it back, leaving authorities with a difficult decision to make as to what was to become of the vessel, which had now become known as the Tsunami Ghost Ship. At first, it was thought that the best course of action would be to destroy the ship, as it was found to contain no cargo, but it was carrying 2,300 gallons of diesel fuel, which may have been a threat to marine life if it were to leak into the water. This prompted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the EPA to carry out a threat assessment of the situation, and it was found that it would be better for the ship to be destroyed and for the diesel to be allowed to evaporate naturally. And so the US Coast Guard readied itself for the destruction of the ship, and one of its vessels, the Anacapa, made its way to the area after the ship had been aimlessly drifting across the Pacific Ocean for more than a year after the tsunami struck. But their plans were interrupted when they were informed that the Bernice C, a 62-foot Canadian fishing vessel, had claimed salvage rights over the Ryo Unmaru, and the operation was immediately halted. The captain of the Bernice C and his crew assessed the condition of the ship and found that it would be unsafe to tow it away from the area, deciding instead that the Coast Guard should go ahead with their plans to destroy it, since it was drifting towards a busy shipping lane and could have posed a serious threat if it ended up in the path of a passing ship. The Coast Guard saw this as a good opportunity for crew members aboard the Anacapa to carry out a live fire exercise, and on the 5th of April 2012, they opened fire on the unmanned vessel, with more than 100 rounds being fired. While the operation was ongoing, a C-130 Hercules plane kept watch from the skies above. warning any approaching ships in the area to stay clear for their own safety, and those of their passengers. After the ship was fired upon and filled with holes, the Anacapa's crew proceeded to use hoses to fill the ship with water, putting out any fires that resulted from the operation and speeding up the rate at which it was sinking. When the operation was completed, the Rio Unmaru disappeared beneath the waters of the Gulf of Alaska, and all that remained was a large column of smoke that trailed away over the ocean. As for the rest of the debris that was washed out into the ocean by the tsunami, it started washing up onto the shores of the western United States in 2012, much earlier than was predicted by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Pictured here is the frightening Yuan, a creature of Japanese folklore that is a disembodied voice. The tales state that the creature will shout out its name, scaring anyone who hears it. They generally take up residence in empty temples or abandoned houses, and they live off of the fear that they cause. There's no written record of the creature's appearance, as it's heard and not often seen. Its name was derived from the sound it makes that it cries out from the darkness. The Yuan was only given its anthropomorphic shape in the Edo period by Sawaki Sushi, an artist who believed that there must be more to the creature than just ghostly noises. When these creatures are encountered, it's generally outside of old buildings or abandoned temples. They usually target lone passers-by, leaping from the shadows and shouting "Uwan." It relies solely on a surprise attack, and some victims may faint and never regain consciousness. This allows the cryptid to steal their essence and flee back into the dark corners. There is a deterrent though. If the victim shouts "Uwan" back at the yokai, it'll flee and never bother them again. According to legend, there's a famous encounter that took place in the Edo period in the Akita prefecture. A couple had purchased an old mansion and moved in together. Upon their first night at the new place, they were woken up by a loud voice shouting "Uwan." They were shocked and searched the mansion for a possible source. It carried on for quite some time and erupted randomly throughout the night and the nights that followed. The newlyweds were unable to get any sleep during this time. A neighbor had asked them why they looked so tired, and the husband attempted to explain that there was a mysterious voice that kept shouting during the night. None of the neighbors had heard such a voice, and so no one believed them. Gossip quickly spread through the town, stating that they were not getting any sleep due to nocturnal activity, which caused them some embarrassment. This led them to never mention the shouting voice again, and were forced to endure these sleepless nights. The mystery surrounding the ghostly cries and the decision of the couple to suffer silently only add to the eerie atmosphere of the tale. The Yuan is said to have 3 claws on each hand, as illustrated by Sushi. It also has a mouth curled into a snarl with teeth blackening, which was a regular practice for the early yokai. It's also pointed out that certain parts of Kumamoto and Kagoshima territory used wan or wanwan as a dialect, or as a general term that meant monster. It's uncertain if this dialect had anything to do with the naming of the Yuan. While it's often said that the yokai inhabit old buildings, the idea that they haunt houses comes from Toriyama Sekien's illustration, which showed the Uwan emitting from behind a willow tree and over a broken building. But no explanation had accompanied the illustration. An expert in Japanese folklore, Shigeru Mizuki, had mentioned in his yokai encyclopedias that reliable information on the bodiless voice is scarce, and there are very few earlier materials that can be found on the subject. Most of the stories depicting the Yuan have come from modern times. According to the 1980s yokai encyclopedia, written by Arifumi Sato, the Uwan are said to haunt graveyards as well, but no proper source of where this information had come from was ever given. The last known image of Levi Davis, a famous rugby player who appeared on The X Factor, shows him walking away from a bar in Barcelona. He was wearing a backpack, had little money in his pocket, and no passport. October 29th was the last day Levi was caught on camera before he went missing. The 24-year-old was visiting a friend on the island of Ibiza when he posted a video to social media about being blackmailed and fearing for his life. Levi also said that he needed to return home. Before his friend could find out what was going on, Levi was on a ferry back to mainland Spain. On the ferry, he deleted the cryptic social media post and sent a video to his mother, calmly talking about how beautiful the view was. But Levi left all of his belongings behind, including his bank cards and passport, and did not return. He had some cash, but it would have been almost impossible for him to get a hotel room without an ID. Levi was next seen on CCTV at the Old Irish pub in Barcelona city center. It was as he left the pub that the last photo of Levi was taken. The creepy image showed him walking away and into the unknown. When Levi was reported missing is unclear, but social media appeals for information were made a few days later. There have been a few unconfirmed sightings of Levi near the pub where he was last seen before he vanished into thin air. His phone last pinged near the train station, suggesting he might have left the area. There's a $10,000 reward for information in this case. Any information can be sent to a dedicated email address at findlevidavis@gmail.com. Seawater damage gives this photo a strange effect, but it would otherwise seem relatively normal. A man in a life vest seems to be relaxing at night. It's actually one of the last photos taken during the sinking of the MS Estonia, one of the worst maritime disasters in European history. Taking place only a few short decades ago, the sinking of the MS Estonia cost more than 800 lives. Stories of survivors from the sinking resembled stories from the Titanic. Couples decided to stay together rather than separate, and only one survived. Freezing temperatures cost many people their lives. The main difference to the sinking of the Titanic, though, was just how quickly it took place. The Estonia was a cruise ferry set for a route between Stockholm and Estonia. It could transport 2,000 people and had a car deck with an openable bow that allowed vehicles to be driven in and out while at port. The Estonia serviced the route for about a year before disaster struck in the early hours of September 28, 1994. The night before, at about 7:15 p.m., the ship had left port like normal. There were 989 people aboard, including the mostly Estonian crew. The majority of the passengers were from Sweden, and most did not know each other. There were a few groups aboard the ship and a number of couples, but most were strangers to one another. There was a storm in the Baltic Sea, and when the ship left coastal waters, it began to rock as waves hit it from head on. Many of the passengers became seasick, but entertainment continued in the bars and pubs. The ship traveled at full power, but was slowed by the force of the waves. At one point, the openable bow on the car deck became loose, and then fell away entirely. The ship began filling with water and tilting to the starboard side. In less than 15 minutes, the tilt was so steep that people who were still inside were unable to escape. Mikhail Un was one of those who did manage to escape. He'd been in his cabin when a loud bang was heard at approximately 1 a.m. Mikhail didn't know what the issue was, but he put his alarm clock and camera in his pocket and rushed out of the room. Seeing the chaos outside, he joined the scramble to get out of the ship and managed to get outside. As the ship continued to tilt, Mikhail climbed onto the outside of the hull and eventually onto the keel. Mikhail used the camera flash to try to get the attention of any rescuers, but there was nobody coming at that time. He ended up in the water, but managed to swim to one of the life rafts. It was partially inflated and there was water inside, but he managed to get in. He was one of the 10 people aboard the raft that managed to survive. When Mikhail developed the photos, seawater had badly damaged the film, but they were still visible. In 2 of the chilling photos, a man can be seen looking in Mikhail's direction. He was later identified as Jano Acer. Jano was one of the survivors and had seen Mikhail's light, but knew he was too far away to rescue him. Only 137 people survived the sinking, which lasted only an hour. A number of changes were introduced to try to stop this from ever happening again. Any fan of the author Mark Twain will be familiar with his most famous character, Tom Sawyer, a boy who loves nothing more than spending time outside rather than attending his classes at school. They'll also remember that Tom and his companions often visited a swimming hole where they kept the sweltering Missouri heat at bay. And while many of us may have done the same thing when we were younger, it's an activity that's frowned upon today, since it's considered to be too dangerous. But one swimming hole seems to have a worse reputation than most, as it seems quite harmless at the surface, as is evidenced in this image, but it hides a terrifying secret beneath the water. The Jacob's Well Spring is now known as one of the most dangerous diving sites in the world, but this hasn't stopped people from flocking to its cool waters during the hotter days of summer in Texas. There are those who are more cautious though, and they vowed never to set foot in the well's water, since it's claimed the lives of at least 8 divers who have attempted to explore the cave system that lies beneath. Attempts were then made in 1980 to discourage divers from exploring the caves, as a rebar grate was affixed to the entrance, further bolstered by quickset concrete. But quite unbelievably, it did little to deter divers who were determined to make it into the depths of the caves. Just 6 months after these modifications were made, the grate was found to have been removed by divers who had the forethought to carry tools with them as they made their way to the cave's entrance. These divers went as far as to leave a note next to the dismantled grate that read, "You can't keep us out," and it became clear that very little could be done to keep people from risking their lives in search of a thrill. Many divers have ventured into the cave system's first chamber, which is the least dangerous, since it reaches 30 feet straight down before angling away for a further 55 feet, making it relatively easy to navigate and to return to the surface. But this is where the caves become much more dangerous, and the fact that the second chamber is referred to as a funnel should be enough to discourage anyone from venturing inside, but this simply isn't the case. The funnel stretches around 80 feet into the distance before ending in an area with restricted access that leads to the third chamber. But what makes it even more terrifying is the fact that it contains a false chimney, which has been mistaken by many divers as a way to the surface, only to find out that they were very wrong and at least one diver has become trapped in this area. This would be enough to keep most divers out of the cave system, but many have ventured beyond this point to the terrifying third chamber, which contains silt and unsteady gravel that poses a serious threat to any diver. If a diver were to make it this far, they would need to make use of inflatable water wings, as they need to avoid stirring up any dust or silt that can seriously hamper their vision and navigation. Two of the most important aspects of diving. Only a few divers have ventured beyond this point, as those who dare to attempt entry into the fourth chamber first have to do something that may seem like pure insanity to the casual observer, which is the removal of their oxygen tanks. This needs to be done because the entrance is too narrow for a diver to swim through, while the tanks are strapped to their back. Those who have made it inside and back to the surface have stated that the chamber is free of silt and filled with beautiful limestone formations. On one occasion, a 21-year-old diver named Diego Adame decided to explore the caves but soon found that he was running out of oxygen after losing one of his flippers, and he realized that he only had a slim chance of making it out in time. He then decided that his only option was to use his blade to cut himself free of his weight belt, and thankfully he was able to make it back to dry land in the nick of time, but he later described his experience as death-defying. Jacob's Well is infamous for the dangers that it holds, but despite this, many people still decide to swim and dive there, ignoring the warning signs that encourage them not to. Exorcisms are not a recent thing, and some of the earliest forms of this date back to the Mesopotamian era. During the first millennium, purveyors of magic would expel demons that brought illness or pain with them. Elaborate rituals would be performed, and occasionally helper demons would be consulted. The following image is a bronze Mesopotamian booklet that's housed at the Louvre Museum in Paris. It's known as the Plaque of Lamashtu, a female demon lord and lover of Pazuzu. Lamashtu was responsible for being a great burden during childbirth, and so this plaque would be used to protect the women. The plaque, in essence, depicts an ancient exorcism that warded off the demon lord. It protected expecting mothers from nightmares, disease, and general unpleasantness. This bronze plate was called peso by the Mesopotamian civilization and belongs to the Babylonian period. It served as an amulet or a talisman, which could either have been artificial or natural. The talisman could be used in the form of a seal or a necklace and was known to have protective powers, warding off evil demons or attracting good fortune. Peso was mostly used among women and can be found in various forms, which included necklaces or statues or plates. In this case, the bronze amulet was hung in the entrances of houses for protection for expecting mothers, as it would reject the disease demon Lamashtu to the underworld. Peso was initially a demon god during the first millennium, who's said to have a dog-like face. He would protect the citizens against storms and damaging winds, as well as the expecting mothers. The plaque, which depicts both the disease bringer as well as the protector, is 133 millimeters high, and the main space is divided into 6 parts. In the highest section, there are the symbolic signs of the main Mesopotamian gods, where the writer requests their support, and another row shows 7 creatures that have animal heads, along with human figures who play the role of protectors. The middle row shows a patient lying on a bed with half human and half fish, tending to them from both sides. Beside them, 3 lords or 3 sub-guards are seen. In the last row of the plaque, Lamashtu can be seen as so represented with a lion's head. Alongside her is Pezo, along with the boat that takes her to the underworld. The underworld is indicated by the presence of fish in the lower part of the plaque. The St. George's Church is found in the town of Lukova and has been deserted since the 1960s. The building was originally built in the mid-14th century, but did not have the best of luck. Throughout the years, it was subject to various accidents and strange events, which led people to believe that it was cursed, preventing anyone from going back there. Rumors that the church was haunted spread throughout the town as well, further adding to its closure in 1968. During its misfortune, the church would be reconstructed until the final one. It was that year that a funerary service was taking place when part of the roof had suddenly caved in at random. Thereafter, the community decided that enough was enough, and the church would be boarded up and never made use of again for service. For almost 50 years, the church would be left abandoned. That was until 2014, when a professor at the Department of Design and Fine Arts at the University of West Bohemia had asked his third-year bachelor students to find a suitable old church that could be used for an art installation. Each of them had to find their own church, some of which only found the foundation or a few walls. Jacob Hadrava knew exactly where to find an abandoned but still intact church. The church was just functional enough for the student to build his life-sized ghostly statues, as seen in the image. They're dressed in robes and seated in the pews. The figurative sculptures had been made from plaster, but with the help of a few models who would be needed to prepare a cast. One cast was made in the church and a copy of the bench was made. The rest of the statues would be made at the university. One singular statue would take half an hour to complete, and he made 32 of them, each of which is hollowed out. According to the artist, these installments represent the soldiers who lived in the area before the First World War, who were forced out of Czechoslovakia. For others, however, they were representations of the parishioners who'd loved and cared for the church. Hadrava's art had paid off, and word spread that the church was not permanently inhabited. Visitors from all over the country began to arrive to see the ghostly statues for themselves. Soon, many would travel all around Europe, and donations began to flood in. A fund was established to assist the local authorities and historians in resurrecting the old church and restoring it to its former glory. The statues certainly sent a shiver down one's spine, but it had brought the building back to life. For more than 8 years, the installation has brought locals and tourists, raising 23,500 euros, which allowed the roof to be repaired. This further offered an opportunity for concerts as well as masses to be held there. This Czech church had previously been marked by hauntings and misfortune, but now appears to be taking a step towards life. Larice Hawkins was 24 when she mysteriously disappeared. The aspiring actress lived in Los Angeles and was cast in a performance on a Norwegian cruise ship called The Escape. The final photo was posted on the Instagram on May 6, 2018. It showed Larice outside of a restaurant with her friend Juan. May 28th was the day of Larice's strange disappearance. On that fateful day, she made dozens of social media posts to Facebook, posting multiple times in a minute, which was strange for her. Most of the posts were short, random thoughts about films, lines from songs, and feeling lonely. A few friends reached out in the comments, but none seemed to engage Larice in conversation. And then the social media posts suddenly stopped, which is a creepy backstory given the context of what happened next. Larice disappeared 80 nautical miles off the coast of New Jersey. There was no sign of her aboard the ship, and no security footage of the events leading to her absence. Most believe Larisse fell overboard and became lost at sea, as there's little other explanation and no signs of foul play. Larisse is sadly considered to have passed away, but she is still listed as an unsolved missing person case, more than 4 years later. The John Lawson House, located in New Hamburg, New York, is one of the oldest structures in town. Built by John Lawson sometime in the 1840s, the Victorian-style home is beautifully designed, with arched windows, corbelled chimneys, and intricate bracketed cornice. However, aside from the beautiful architecture, the house is also known for something else, and that something is mannequins. On any given day, a trio of female mannequins could be found placed in various positions around the property's front porch. Life-sized, the mannequins sported clothing, wigs, and a vast array of accessories that were constantly changing. People have reported seeing them holding things like towels, bird cages, books, and tools. Their vintage wigs and outfits change daily as well, depending on the time of year. This in itself is bizarre enough. However, what makes these mannequins extra creepy is the fact that no one knows where they came from, why they were there, or who changed their clothing. Locals claimed that when inclement weather occurred, the mannequins disappeared, yet no one has ever been seen moving them. According to the neighbors, on certain nights, a faint glow can be seen coming from one of the house's curtained windows. But other than that, there were never any signs of life at the home. Some believe the mannequins could have been a nod to several tragic events that occurred in the town. In 1871, a 25-car freight train derailed and was struck by an oncoming train, killing 22 people aboard. Then, 6 years later, a massive fire raged through the town, burning the majority of the structures to the ground. The John Lawson House, however, was left untouched by the flames, as was the home directly across the street. The mannequins could often be found looking in the direction of the crash site, less than 200 feet from the home, or towards the abandoned home across the road. The mannequins made their debut in the early 2000s and continued to appear until 2016. That year, the home was sold and the mannequins simply vanished, leaving locals with more questions than answers. Over the years, many people have tried to solve the mystery, but to no avail. Records indicate the home was sold twice during the years the mannequins were active. However, from all accounts, the home remained vacant during this time. Whatever the case may be, the person responsible has never come forward, and the mystery of the moving mannequins remains unsolved. In December of 1924, the SS Watertown, a United States tanker ship carrying crude oil, left from its New Orleans, Louisiana port, headed for California. Captained by veteran sailor Keith Tracy, the ship and its crew had successfully navigated the journey through the Panama Canal many times. Sadly for two of the sailors, this trip would be their first and their last aboard the Watertown, after a tragic accident claimed their lives. It would not, however, be the last time the sailors were seen by the crew. On December 4th, James Courtney and Michael Meehan were assigned to clean one of the empty cargo tanks in the ship's hull. Armed with cleaning supplies, the pair descended the tank's metal ladder and began the routine task of scrubbing the interior of its walls. Without proper ventilation, however, fumes began to fill the enclosed area, quickly overwhelming James and Michael. A short time later, other members of the crew went to check on the sailors when they discovered them unconscious and unresponsive inside of the tank. James was found lying across from Michael, indicating that Michael had succumbed to the fumes first. It's believed that in an attempt to drag Michael to the ladder, James also fell victim to the fumes and fell unconscious a few moments later. The sailors were declared deceased and, as was tradition, given a burial at sea. The following day, however, The ship's first mate reported seeing the two sailors among the waves alongside the ship. Over the next few days, the other crew members, including the captain, reported the same bizarre sightings of James and Michael, stating that the pair were always seen about 40 feet away from the ship, and roughly 10 feet apart. When the ship docked in New Orleans, Captain Tracy reported the two deaths as well as the unusual sightings of the pair to the company that owned the vessel. Unconvinced by the story, the company asked for proof of such a bizarre event. Having nothing, the captain ordered his first mate to purchase a Kodak camera to capture the event should it happen again. Watertown again left its port and headed for California. It wasn't long before the apparitions of the dead sailors were spotted again in the water. This time, however, Captain Tracy was ready and snapped 6 photographs of the mysterious figures. Once the ship completed its delivery and returned once again to New Orleans, he sent the photos to New York to be processed. 5 of the 6 photos appeared to show nothing more than the ocean. However, the 6th photo was different. In the black and white image, 2 men are clearly visible, bobbing amongst the waves near the ship. According to the captain and crew, these mysterious figures floating in the water were identical to the deceased sailors. 10 years after the photograph was originally developed, it was published in a shipping journal called the East Coast Journal. Intrigued by the creepy photo, many set out to discover its origins and to disprove its authenticity. Unfortunately, by the time its existence was made known, both the captain and many of the original crew members of the ship had since passed away. With the original image and negative lost, the only people to witness this bizarre event gone, the mystery of the unexplained photograph may never be solved. The entrance to Larnach Castle is often referred to as the only castle in New Zealand. It's a 25-room Gothic construction, which is a house or a mock castle. It's situated on the ridge of the Otago Peninsula, close to Dunedin. While it may have a magnificent view, it's not entirely a very happy place. The place was built in 1871 by William James Larnach, a merchant baron and politician. It took a fair while to complete, and materials from all around the world were used, including marble from Italy, tiles from England, and glass from both France and Venice. In 1885, a ballroom was added, which was the size of 3,000 square feet, a gift from his daughter, Kate, who had just turned 21. It's William himself who's said to haunt the dream hole. Many have reported seeing a male figure wandering around the castle. Some have alleged that his remains were disturbed in the family crypt, resulting in the release of his spirit. He's not the only one who's said to be haunting the castle. It's been said that Eliza, the man's wife, haunts the landing close to her bedroom, and the oldest daughter, of course, haunts the ballroom. A New Zealand TV program called Ghost Hunt had filmed an episode in the castle, and had even gotten a photograph of who they believed to be William. During a 2-night stay, the team members of Quantum Foundations had conducted EVP sessions, which would yield clear voices that were answering the questions they asked. Contamination by other clients staying there had been ruled out, since the team had sole occupancy. In the early morning hours, one of the investigators had a personal ghostly encounter. She'd felt a presence beside her which had made her jump in fright, and had heard the swishing sounds of a dress. Another had captured male voices on an EVP who was speaking in short sentences from the same location. The ballroom sessions found sounds of dishes being moved around, even though there was no one in there. There appeared to be no logical explanation, and nothing was moved or altered upon investigation. Constance de Bath Brandon had also been a family resident here who passed away due to unknown causes in her late 80s. It was during an EVP in her bedroom that a whisper of "I didn't do it" was captured in response to a question. That was referred to as a Class A capture by the team. The room housed various personal belongings, which included a wedding dress. Upon William's passing, he'd left the house to Constance, but the children had opposed this and ultimately won in court. The family no longer wished to live in the castle thereafter, but they could not sell it either, as no one at the time could afford it. It would later be taken over by the state and stripped bare. In the first decades of the 20th century, it would be used as a psychiatric hospital, a hospital for shell-shocked soldiers, as well as a nunnery. For an unspecified amount of time, Kate's luxurious ballroom was used as a sheep holding pen. In the 1960s, it was bought by the Baker family, who restored and refurbished the castle as a tourist attraction. The stables were turned into guest rooms, and attractions were placed around the building. A statue of a woman with dark hair and blue skin and Victorian-era undergarments hovered below the ceiling. She was meant to be a ghost, which is possibly a selling point that the Bakers came up with, following the reports of hauntings there. During one of the guests' visits, he inquired about the ghosts, and the duty manager confirmed them and stated that there'd been stories of a man's figure being spotted. There'd been strange knockings that evening as well, and one guest had reportedly been shoved by an invisible force 3 separate times. Joseph Driscoll's strange disappearance occurred on Remembrance Day in 2022 in British Columbia. As part of the investigation into this missing person case, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police shared a creepy last photo of Joseph caught on camera before he mysteriously disappeared. Joseph was an electrician working in northern British Columbia. He had traveled to see a tragically hip tribute band the night before his inexplicable vanishing. The final photo was taken from a security camera near the door of a motel in the Valley View area. The backstory behind the strange photo is creepy because Joseph wasn't staying at the motel and wasn't inside for very long before leaving, never to be found again. On November 11th, he was stopped by police while driving a black truck. There was another person in the truck with him. Why he was stopped and who he was with hasn't been revealed, but the truck was impounded. Nobody was arrested for a crime. At some point during the day, Joseph was in touch with his sister, Emma. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary about the conversation and had no reason to believe it would be the last time she spoke to him before he vanished without a trace. At about 11:50 p.m., Joseph left the Tournament Inn motel where he was staying. The weather was freezing, but Joseph had been outside all day, only wearing a hooded sweatshirt, long john-style pants, and ankle boots. He was caught on CCTV 40 minutes later at the second motel. It was this final photo that police shared with the media. They stated he looked significantly different to the old photos that had been shared prior. The final sighting of Joseph was walking along the 1700 block of the East Trans-Canada Highway, 15 minutes after the creepy photo was taken. The investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Joseph began a few days later. It was extremely out of character for him to go without contacting his family for so long, and investigators learned he hadn't caught his flight home. Joseph's sister later shared that he was recovering from addiction. Joseph was also an extremely outgoing person before he went missing. His family feared he might have relapsed from isolation after the worldwide lockdowns. There's a $10,000 reward for information in this case. Anyone with information can contact Kamloops Police at 250-828-3000. Shalissa Pratt mysteriously disappeared under extremely strange circumstances when the 34-year-old was last caught on camera leaving her Hollywood apartment on August 22, 2022. According to her husband, Keith, Shalissa had grown away from him. On the afternoon that she became a missing person, she allegedly had a breakdown and left their Hollywood apartment. Keith caught up with her at the Greyhound bus station in downtown Los Angeles, where she planned to visit family in Atlanta, as she had done a month before. The last time she went to Atlanta, she sent her family a photo of her bus ticket so they would know that she was coming and then turn her phone off so Keith wouldn't be able to track her movements, as he was known to sometimes remotely ping the cell phone towers and find out where she had gone missing. She changed her mind and returned to LA. This time, there was no contact between Shalissa and her family, and no photo was sent of a bus ticket to Atlanta. The first time her mother learned about the trip was when Keith called her later that day to tell her what had happened. She went to the bus station to wait for Shalissa, but the missing person never arrived. Meanwhile, Keith tracked her cell phone and found out her final destination was in San Bernardino, for reasons unknown. Shalissa's strange disappearance is another missing person case with far more questions than answers. Investigators found it strange how Shalissa had turned off the phone one time but not the other. They also cannot explain why she went missing from the bus, and they're uncertain if she was making a brief stop and intended to return. After Shalissa was reported as a missing person, detectives learned of a recent crime story at San Bernardino in a bus station. Someone matching Shalissa's appearance had been kicked out of the station for trying to steal a suitcase. Caught on camera was CCTV footage of this event, but the unnerving images have not been released. Anyone with information on this unsolved missing person case should contact the Los Angeles Police Department at 213-996-1800. On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl in Provincetown, Massachusetts, was out walking the family dog at the Race Point Dunes when she made a startling discovery. Just yards from the road, the decomposed remains of a woman lay on an oversized beach blanket. Authorities were immediately alerted to the discovery, and after a brief investigation, the case was ruled a homicide. The woman was found lying face down on the undisturbed beach blanket, missing several teeth, both hands, and a forearm. One side of her skull had been crushed. Her ultimate cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. The woman had long auburn hair that was pulled back in a ponytail. She was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed about 145 pounds. Found underneath the woman's body was a pair of Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana. The woman, however, had no identification on her person. The inability to ID the woman resulted in her becoming a Jane Doe, known as the Lady of the Dunes. Over the years, the woman's body was exhumed several times for DNA comparisons. However, these attempts to identify her have proven unsuccessful. In 2015, a new theory caught the public's eye when Joe Hill, son of horror author Stephen King, informed police that the unknown woman may have appeared as an extra in the movie Jaws. During a scene in the movie depicting the 4th of July beach party, a woman bearing a striking resemblance to the Lady of the Dunes, dressed in Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana, similar to those found on the unidentified woman's body, can be seen standing amongst the other extras on the beach. While this theory has never been proven, both the Lady of the Dunes as well as the woman in the photograph from the movie remain unidentified. On November 23, 1944, soldiers stationed at a US Allied base in Kortenberg, Belgium, were caught off guard when an American B-17 bomber plane began to descend over the base. With no reports of a scheduled landing from such a plane, the airbase crew watched with bated breath as the 35,000-pound war machine clumsily rocketed towards them with its landing gear down. The plane clumsily touched down, hitting one wing on the ground, destroying one of the plane's engines before touching down, approximately 100 feet from the anti-gunner's position at the airbase. Soldiers watched for nearly 20 minutes, expecting the crew to disembark from the disabled aircraft and explain the situation any minute. However, when no one emerged, Army Major John Crisp decided to investigate. He and several airmen carefully approached the bomber, cautious of who might be aboard. However, when they opened the plane's door, they were astounded to find nobody inside. Evidence such as food wrappers and a flight log found in the cockpit indicated that someone had recently been inside. However, all of the parachutes appeared to still be in place. The bizarre report was passed through the chain of command, who in turn investigated the unexplainable incident. Using the airplane's tail number, the names of the pilot and crew of the bomber were quickly learned. All 10 crew members and the pilot were found safe and sound stationed at a base in Belgium. According to them, They had been part of a squadron of B-17s that were carrying out bombing missions in eastern Germany when the plane suddenly experienced a malfunction. Unable to maintain a proper altitude, the pilot ordered the crew to toss any unnecessary weight from the plane. However, as their rapid descent continued, one of the airplane's engines took a direct hit from an anti-aircraft gun. Left with no other option, the pilot engaged the plane's autopilot and ordered the crew to bail near Brussels, Belgium. How the plane was able to navigate its way all the way to an Allied base and safely land with no crew aboard remains unknown. The Hyosube is a Japanese yokai that's the relative of another known as Kappa, its cousin. Pictured here is a basic drawing of what one may expect to encounter in underwater caves, according to Japanese folklore. The child-sized river monster resides in Kyushu and prefers to come out of the waters during the evening. It's said that this creature loves to indulge in eggplants. According to legend, the Hyosube had originally been dolls that had been brought to life by a magician to build him a shrine that was used to summon a battle god of the same name. Once the shrine had been completed, they were thrown in the river. These creatures were found mostly in Saga and Miyazaki prefectures, in Kyushu, and are believed to have been named after Hyobu Taifu, the man who would have had to deal with the yokai that would become a threat to the people who resided near the Shomi Jinja temple. They take the appearance of small bipedal animals with hairy-bodied bald heads and are adorned with sharp teeth and claws. While they're known to inhabit the river waters, they do have the tendency to climb into the bathtubs of nearby households, after which they leave behind a stench and greasy hair. While they may not appear to be very threatening, these yokai should not be underestimated. Their personalities are filled with rage after being discarded and can be violent and unpredictable. It's also believed that they retain the power of the god that was summoned. They find pleasure in causing damage to property and do not back down from direct, straight-out assault. That being said, the living dolls are both physically and magically weaker than a kappa, and so they have to pick their fights accordingly. The Hyosube are of a stricter origin and choose to rather be debilitating and harsh. They have a hatred towards horses, which seems rather irrational. Their hair is said to be toxic toward horses, but anywhere that the creature travels, disease quickly follows. This disease-harboring ability is not the consequence of their living conditions, but is rather magical in nature. The illnesses are akin to a curse, as one story outlines. A woman had chased a Hyosube away from her eggplant field and fell dangerously ill. She then turned purple before entirely withering away. Others have reported catching a lethal contagion, all of which regard the powers of the beast. Its weaknesses are less imposing than that of a kappa, and it can be tested in face-to-face combat. They lack the abilities of direct magic and can be quite easily distracted by eggplants. The hairy cryptid is much nastier than its cousin, hence why the man, Hyobu Taifu, had to fend them off from the inhabitants around the temple. Nupeppo, as pictured here, refers to a yokai in Japanese folklore. Yokai are the creatures and phenomena that occur in Japanese tales, including spirits and monsters. Its name comes from the word nuperi, which means a flat-faced or dazed expression, a derogatory slang term that was previously used to describe women who used too much makeup. This creature resembles a large blob with saggy lumps that take the form of limbs. The wrinkles on its face take the appearance of eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and it stands no more than 1.5 meters tall. In addition to being a lumpy blob, this yokai is said to have a pungent odor and stays in dark areas that are secluded, including mountain ridges, temples that have been abandoned, or unpopular streets. The Nupeppo seems to find enjoyment in the shock and surprised expression on human faces. In Volume 3 of 180 Hitoyo Hanashi texts, Maki Bokusen recorded an incident in 1609 where a creature resembling this yokai was spotted in the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu's garden. He'd been so repulsed by it that he ordered it to be taken away and cast out to the mountain areas. He would later come to learn that he'd missed out on a rare opportunity, as it's been alleged that the creature can bestow an unusual amount of strength if a piece of him is consumed. The wobbly blob is a relatively harmless and quite elusive yokai, aside from the aggressive odor that it gives off. Despite its formless appearance, the Nupeppo is quick-moving, which makes it especially difficult to chase away. According to another legend of the yokai, consuming a part of it may also grant eternal youth, and can cure any disease or illness, and often provides the solution to any issue. While they are fairly docile creatures, there have been various theories as to where the foul smell and strange appearance comes from, which are rather macabre. Tales have claimed that the cryptid wanders around aimlessly and is a solitary creature, but there have been reports of them being spotted in groups. If encountered, it's unlikely to do any harm at all, but one would find comfort in the shocked and alarmed expression that would paint one's face. These photos, taken by students at the V&R Institute of Engineering and Technology, look like countless taken by university students around the world. The group was having fun on a trip, cooling off in a river during a rest stop. Moments later, that same water would wash 24 of the students away. The terrible backstory behind these photos has become known as the Bias River disaster. The photos were taken on June 8, 2014. The students were mostly engineering students from college, enjoying a well-earned outing after their exams. The trip had gotten off to a bad start, with the bus driver demanding payment up front, and then a flat tire leading to a delay of an hour. The group decided to drive through lunch to try to make it to a planned water rafting activity, but they would never make it. At about 4 p.m., they stopped for lunch, then continued on for a little way. Shortly before 6:30 p.m., the bus stopped again so someone could use the restroom. The location was near a trail that led to the River Bias. The students and some of the staff supervising the trip went down to the riverbank. The water was very shallow at this point, only about an ankle deep, and the students waded in to take these photos. It was extremely warm, even at that point in the evening, and the water was refreshing. At around 6:30 p.m., 2 men on the bank began shouting and pointing upstream. They'd been collecting sand, but now suddenly were in distress. Not far upstream was a dam, and it had suddenly released water without warning. In a matter of minutes, the water in the river rose and washed away many of the students. Some were lucky enough to be close enough to the banks to be pulled out. One student saved 5 of his fellow students before he was washed away himself. A total of 24 students and 1 of the tour guides were washed away. The dam workers insisted that they had played warning sirens, but nobody in the neighboring villages had heard them. The dam was ultimately deemed to be at fault, and the families of the victims received compensation, but that couldn't make up for the devastation. There's always something a little unsettling about underwater photographs, especially when the thing being photographed doesn't belong at the bottom of the seafloor. But while there are plenty of ships that have come to rest at the bottom of the ocean, finding 2 fully intact trains resting on the seafloor was a surprise. The 2 locomotives were first discovered in 1985. They rested about 5 miles off the coast of Long Branch, New Jersey, and were covered in decades worth of rust and barnacles. The original discovery was made by Paul Hepler, who was mapping the ocean floor when he came across something unusual. At first, he couldn't make out what it was, but later dives revealed the 2 trains. The trains rested upright, facing in the same direction. Paul described them as almost looking as if they were racing across the sea floor. Photos of the trains showed that sea creatures had now made them into homes, but also allowed train experts to reveal what they were. The trains are extremely rare Planet Class 222T models that experts believe were manufactured by Seth Wilmarth Union Works sometime between 1848 and 1855. The reason why these trains were so rare is because they were not very useful. The steam engines were 15 tons, which couldn't compete with the 35-ton engines that were being produced at the time. How and why these 2 locomotives ended up at the bottom of the ocean remains a mystery. Historians have found no record of the trains being lost or even being created in the first place. A possible explanation came in 2016 when researchers were looking into Seth Wilmarth and uncovered an order from the New York and Erie Railroad made in 1854. The railroad company couldn't pay in cash though, and at a time of economic uncertainty, it seems unlikely the company would have accepted the notes that were offered as payment. Historians believed the locomotives were being transported from Boston to New York by ship when they went overboard. A likely scenario is that the ship hit a storm and the trains were pushed overboard to stop the whole ship from sinking. No record of this has ever been found though, and the subjects of these creepy photos remain mysterious. The case of the disappearance of Patricia Otto, which occurred on the 31st of August 1976, is one that's full of twists, turns, and sometimes unbelievable events that seem to suggest her life was ended by her husband. But since vital pieces of evidence have been destroyed, we may never know what happened to her. Patricia and her husband Ralph were living in Lewiston, Idaho at the time, but their marriage was far from ideal. Ralph, who was 18 years older than Patricia, was known to have a violent temper, leading to her filing for divorce. But with Mother's Day just around the corner, the couple decided to try and remedy the relationship, since they had 2 children aged 3 and 5. 3 months later, on the 31st of August, the couple's 2 daughters had been visiting with their grandmother, and Patricia traveled to her house to get them. According to Ralph, he and Patricia got into a heated argument shortly after she got home, and she stormed out, never to be seen again. One of their daughters would later tell investigators that she saw her father striking her mother, and that he'd picked her up with his hands wrapped around her throat. She added that he then carried her away, but she couldn't say where to. When Patricia was still nowhere to be found the next day, her sister filed a missing person report. Ralph drove to the sister's house, where he dropped his 2 children off, saying that he was going to look for his wife. It soon came to investigators' attention that Ralph was a jealous man who had accused Patricia of cheating on him with someone else. This only further heightened their suspicions, along with the fact that Ralph told his daughters that their mother had willingly chosen to leave without them. Ralph was repeatedly questioned, which he saw as harassment, and he hatched a plan to put it to a stop. He met with a hitman and asked him to end the life of the Lewiston police captain who was leading the investigation into Patricia's disappearance. Unbeknownst to him, though, the man he'd spoken to was an undercover police officer. Following the conversation between them, Ralph was arrested and sent to prison for 10 years. He would only spend half that time in jail, though, as it was found that Idaho didn't consider the hiring of a hitman to be synonymous with attempted murder, so he was set free. It seemed as though Patricia's case would never be solved, but in August of 1978, a set of female remains, later named the Finley Creek Jane Doe, was found at Finley Creek, Oregon, 3 hours' drive from the family's house where Patricia was last seen. The woman who was found was dressed in similar clothing to Patricia's when she was last seen, but the connection between the 2 cases wasn't made, and the remains were cremated when she couldn't be identified. The clothes that the deceased woman was wearing were also destroyed, along with any evidence that may have been present. One of the couple's daughters saw a sketch of the woman, and she's convinced that it was indeed her mother who was found, but has been unable to prove it as of yet. Anyone who has any information on this case is asked to contact the Lewiston Police Department at 208-746-0171. Thanks to advances in technology, scientists are able, with relative accuracy, to predict when an earthquake is likely to occur, though it's still by no means an exact science. Nevertheless, the technology that we use to predict these tremors, such as seismometers, have saved countless lives over the years. Since this technology wasn't available in ancient times, earthquakes were far more unpredictable, and hence claimed many more lives when they struck unexpectedly. In some cultures, the tremors were seen as messages from the gods, usually a warning of bad times to come. But one Chinese inventor who lived 2,000 years ago seemingly invented a device that could warn him and his people of an incoming earthquake. And today, we have no idea how he could have devised such a system with limited knowledge. The man in question was Zhang Heng, who was not only an inventor but also a mathematician, engineer, geographer, and astronomer, who lived sometime around 132 AD. He was clearly ahead of his time as far as technology was concerned. The device that he invented was fashioned using what looks like an ancient wine jar or a metal container that was used to heat water over a fire. It measured about 6.5 feet in diameter, and around the outside it was decorated with 8 dragons' heads, each representing a different compass point. But these dragons weren't just added for decoration. They each had a small bronze ball in their mouths, beneath which was a toad with its mouth wide open. In the event of a tremor, the ball would drop into the toad's mouth, showing not only that an earthquake was about to hit, but what direction it was traveling from. But we have no idea how these balls were kept in place or why the balls would suddenly drop upon detecting a tremor. It's been suggested that a stick was placed in the middle of the device, and when a vibration was felt, it would fall over, causing the ball to roll into the toad's mouth. When the ball hit the toad's mouth, a sound could be heard, and whoever was watching over the device would immediately warn everyone to get ready for an earthquake. While many people were skeptical about the device's efficacy, it was proven to work on one occasion in 138 AD. In that instance, a ball fell into a toad's mouth, indicating that an earthquake had hit to the west of the capital city. It caused quite a stir, but many people doubted whether the earthquake had actually occurred. That is, until a few days had passed, and a messenger arrived to report that a tremor had indeed hit the region, which lay to the west of the city. Furthermore, he stated that the quake happened at the same time that the ball fell, confirming that Zheng Heng was not only correct, but that he was one of the brightest minds alive at the time. A reward of up to $50,000 is being offered to anyone who comes forward with information leading to the whereabouts of 27-year-old Julianne Miller, who disappeared on the 22nd of September 1982. To date, there's only been one suspect in this case, but investigators have been unable to prove his guilt despite a lot of evidence suggesting that James Clayton, Julianne's boyfriend, is responsible for ending her life. Julianne had been married once in the past, but that relationship didn't last long. After her marriage ended, her father gifted her with a cottage, which was situated in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, and she immediately moved in. She lived in the cottage while studying at the University of Hartford, and before long, she and James met. She invited him to move in with her, and he readily agreed. To make extra money while studying, Julianne worked at a daycare center, and for reasons unknown, she decided to transfer half of the cottage to James. But she would soon discover that this was a mistake when their relationship started to fall apart about a year after they met, and she started making arrangements to have James removed from the deed. In September of 1982, she acquired a quitclaim deed, and it was now certain that she'd be following through with her plans. This likely also meant that the couple wouldn't be together for much longer, but they continued living together for the time being. The very next day, Julianne went missing. A neighbor would report seeing her sitting on the couch in the cottage with James. The couple was watching TV together, but before long they started discussing the deed, resulting in an argument. This was the last time that Julianne was seen. But strangely, James never filed a missing person report. He would later claim that he didn't do so, since he applied for a job with the state police, and in his opinion, such a report would hamper his chances of being hired. Instead, Julianne's parents reported her as missing 8 days later when they couldn't contact her. When the cottage was searched, Julianne's purse, glasses, and her vehicle were found to still be there, as was her dog, Bojo. Inside her purse, investigators found the quick deed document that she had acquired, and they noted that James had signed it. James became a suspect early on, thanks to his inaction following Julianne's disappearance, but he maintained his innocence. He stated that she left the house that day and got into a brown pickup truck with an unknown man, but then things started to get strange. Some of the furniture in the cottage had been moved, and cushions on the couch had suddenly gone missing. White spots were found on the carpet in the living room, suggesting that someone had used bleach to clean areas on it. James claimed that the cushions were at the dry cleaners, but when the carpet and couch were tested, they were found to contain biological material, which James claimed belonged to Bojo. James forced 2 tenants who lived in the cottage to move out, though they were asked to take polygraph tests, which they both passed. James was also asked to take the same test, but he refused. Some of Julianne's grandmother's jewelry had gone missing, and it was later discovered that the pieces had been pawned by James's brother. The case has since gone cold, with James still being the only suspect, but he cannot be arrested due to a lack of evidence. If you know where Julianne is or what happened to her, you're asked to contact the Old Saybrook Police Department at 860-395-3140. Ram Setu, also known as Adam's Bridge, is an ancient bridge that connects India to Sri Lanka. but its origins are a mystery that has left scholars scratching their heads for centuries, since many people believe that it wasn't actually constructed, but formed by nature instead. The bridge begins on Pamban Island in India and ends on Mannar Island in Sri Lanka. While most scientific studies have determined that it was formed naturally, some religious theories have been put forward in an effort to explain its existence. In the Hindu faith, it's said that the bridge was created by Lord Rama, who was aided by an army of monkeys that did his bidding. He needed to get to Sri Lanka since his wife Sita had been taken captive and was being held there against her will. According to this theory, the bridge was constructed in 5000 BC, and quite surprisingly, carbon dating that was performed on the bridge seems to indicate that this time frame is correct, further deepening the mystery. Some archaeologists and geologists have stated that some of the stones used in the bridge's construction are up to 7,000 years old, while the sandbar beneath it is said to be much younger, about 4,000 years old. According to legend, it was possible to use the bridge to walk from one side to the other, a distance of about 30 miles, until sometime in the 15th century, possibly 1480, when a series of storms hit the area, causing the channel beneath it to become much deeper and rendering the bridge inaccessible. As for the scientists who maintain that it is a natural formation, they've found the bridge to be made up of a series of linear coral reefs or limestone reefs. These reefs sit between 3 and 32 feet beneath the water, which means that any ships in the area have to sail around it or risk running aground. It's also been suggested that Sri Lanka and India were once part of the same landmass, and that when they drifted apart, a small section of land trailed behind, forming the bridge that we know today, though this theory has never been proven. While the structure is known as Ram Setu, Nala Setu, and Setu Banda, it's also called Adam's Bridge in honor of Adam's Peak, which is located in Sri Lanka and said to be in the exact spot where Adam, the first man created in the Bible, fell when he was expelled from the Garden of Eden. Today, talks are being held to decide whether a second, usable bridge should be constructed over Adam's Bridge, since it would connect India to Sri Lanka, making it easy to travel between the two countries. But this has caused some uproar in both of these countries. 25-year-old Nancy Deborah Willis, known to her friends as Debbie, has been missing for a very long time, and hopes of finding out what happened to her are quickly dwindling. But her case remains open, and investigators are still encouraging anyone with information on the case to come forward. Nancy spent her childhood growing up in Yuma, Virginia, during the 1960s. Her family eventually relocated to Johnson City, Tennessee, Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, and Denver, Colorado, before eventually settling in Ringgold, Georgia. As an adult, she married a man named Howard Hawk Willis, and the couple had 2 children. They moved to Bradley County, Tennessee, and were in the process of building a house of their own when Nancy suddenly went missing. It's known that Nancy spent time in Gate City, Virginia, with her family on the 23rd of December, 1986. They celebrated Christmas early, since Nancy was meant to be back home for Christmas Day. But after leaving Gate City, she suddenly vanished, never to be seen or heard from again. When she failed to make contact with her family, they became concerned that something had happened to her, and she was reported as missing. Investigators immediately spoke to Howard, but he stated that Nancy had left him in March of that year and that he hadn't seen her since. He added that as far as he knew, she took a bus to Chattanooga in Tennessee, since he'd dropped her off at the bus stop, but he had no idea where she went from there. He would, however, end up in a lot of trouble with the law in the years to come. In 2002, Howard was charged with ending the lives of 2 people, Adam and Samantha Chrismer, a couple who had just gotten married and were living with Howard's mother in Johnson City. His guilt in this case became apparent when he was caught on a recording made by his ex-wife, Wilda Gadd, admitting that he'd ended the couple's lives with a firearm. The recording was made with the aid of Bradley County Sheriff's Office, and with this evidence in hand, Howard's fate was sealed. Howard was eventually found guilty in the charges against him in 2010, and he received the death penalty. But he was also implicated in another equally heinous crime. He was suspected of having been responsible for the disappearance of his stepfather, Sam Thomas, who was later also found deceased. Howard wasn't charged with this crime due to a lack of evidence, but investigators are certain that he's the culprit and that he may be linked to the Chrismers. He's the only suspect in Nancy's disappearance, but has also not been charged with this crime, since she's never been found and her fate remains unknown. If you know what happened to Nancy, or have any contributions to this case, you're asked to contact the Bradley County Sheriff's Department at 615-476-0572. In February of 1567, Lord Darnley, also known as Henry, was married to Mary, Queen of Scots, and at first they were head over heels in love. But Darnley soon started to resent his wife's power, leading to an event that destroyed their relationship. As time passed, he grew weary of not always being the focus of Mary's attention, since she was often otherwise engaged, thanks to her duties as queen. Having had enough, he attempted to assert control over her by having her secretary's life ended in front of her. But this was a bad idea, as the event only deepened Mary's resentment towards him, and their relationship only deteriorated further. At the same time, the Scottish lords of the time started to worry that Darnley held too much power, and that he needed to be taught a lesson. He was also the subject of rumors that he was having affairs with several men, and it was proven that he'd been unfaithful to Mary, having been involved with a number of women over the years as well. He had a child out of wedlock and was in the habit of visiting brothels on occasion. Hence, Mary denied him the matrimonial crown, leading to the rift in their marriage and his ultimate demise, according to some historians. In February of 1567, Darnley had fallen ill. It's believed that he was either suffering from smallpox or syphilis, and he was taken to Kirk O'Field in Edinburgh, where he stayed at the Provost's Lodge while he attempted to recover. On the 10th of February, Mary visited him there, after which she traveled to Holyrood, where one of her ladies-in-waiting was getting married. Then, at around 2 a.m. that morning, the city was rocked by a massive explosion that occurred at Kirk O'Field. Darnley and his servant were both found deceased in a neighbor's orchard. Since they were dressed in their night clothes, it's assumed that they ran from the building but were unable to escape before the blast. But upon further investigation, it was found that their lives had not been ended by explosion, but that they'd been strangled by an unknown person. The mystery only deepened when it was revealed that strange items were strewn around their bodies, including a sharpened blade, a length of rope, and a chair. At the top of the suspect list were Mary and her counselor, Bothwell. Rumors that they were responsible only became more rampant when the pair got married a few months later, but no evidence was ever found to implicate either of them. This marriage also wouldn't last, and it would ultimately spell the end for Mary. After she and Bothwell separated, Mary fled to England, and there she was arrested by the orders of Queen Elizabeth II, who maintained that she was responsible for Darnley's demise. She was imprisoned for the next 19 years until she was eventually executed, and according to many scholars, took the secret of what happened to Darnley to the grave with her. It's been suggested that she knew about the murderous plot, since she was supposed to be staying with him at Kirk O'Field on the night of the explosion, but remembered at the last moment that she needed to travel to Holyrood for the wedding. To this day, Darnley's case remains unsolved, and it's likely to remain that way forever. 22-year-old Stephen Hendricks' disappearance, which took place on the 5th of September, 1988, is a strange one indeed. It involves a fire that was set at his house in Washington, Indiana on the day of his disappearance, and his case has never been solved. At the time, Stephen worked at Craney's Body Shop, and he was engaged to an 18-year-old woman named Rebecca Harvey. By all accounts, their relationship was doing well, as the couple had decided to move in together, and Rebecca moved her belongings into Stephen's house on Oak Grove Road. She worked at a pizza restaurant to make extra money. But on the 5th of September of that year, something sinister happened that investigators are still unable to explain. At around 3:30 a.m. that morning, a neighbor contacted the police and frantically reported that Stephen's house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters were deployed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the house was already beyond saving, and the fire was burning so intensely that it had caused paint to start bubbling and peeling off the cars that were parked in the house's driveway. Fearing that someone may be trapped inside, firefighters entered the house and unfortunately found Rebecca inside. It was quickly determined that the fire had been set intentionally, since gasoline was used as an accelerant, but the motive was unknown. No sign of Stephen was found inside the house, and it's believed that he may have been forcibly removed from the building, and that he then became a victim of foul play. In the weeks that followed, no sign of him was found. He never picked up his $2,000 worth of tools from Craney's body shop and never collected his last paycheck, which of course was very out of the ordinary. Inside the house, investigators found his keys, wallet, all of his clothes, and his car still parked in the driveway. This suggested that this was no mere robbery gone wrong, and that Stephen hadn't simply decided to leave of his own accord, since he would have taken his wallet and likely would have left his car. It isn't known whether any suspects were formally identified, but one man, a former boyfriend of Rebecca's, was questioned and asked to provide an alibi for the time when the fire was started. He was unable to do so, but he was also never arrested or charged. It isn't known why, but in 2019, investigators searched Oak Grove Cemetery in connection with Stephen's case, but they've declined to say whether they found any clues. It later came to light that a rumor had been spread about a fresh grave being dug at the cemetery. This case remains open, and anyone with useful information is urged to contact either the Indiana State Police at 812-482-1441 or the Davies County Sheriff's Office at 812-254-1060. In 1977, South Africa was a very different country from the one we know today. It was a thriving and quickly developing country with a massive amount of resources that were being used to develop it even further. And compared to today, crime statistics were very low. That doesn't mean that crimes weren't being committed, though. One of the most memorable bank heists in South Africa's history took place on Easter weekend of that year, and to this day the culprits have never been identified. The robbery took a lot of planning, as was discovered after the fact. Someone who was operating under the alias Mr. Nightingale had entered an empty store in the town's central business district and started digging a tunnel. The tunnel would eventually reach all the way to the vault of a standard bank branch, where he then proceeded to remove the equivalent of $1.1 million in today's money, before making his getaway without ever being noticed. The robber was given the moniker Mr. Nightingale, since this was the name used to rent the vacant shop where the tunnel was dug. Many people believe that it wasn't just the work of one man, but that a group of robbers worked throughout the weekend after months of planning. Since no suspects were ever identified, many theories have been put forward over the years, one of which suggests that one of the culprits was a man who worked as a miner at the time, and the evidence is rather compelling. A few witnesses came forward to report that they'd seen several men wearing blue coveralls in the area at the time of the robbery, but since the store was being renovated, this wasn't anything strange. One woman, the owner of a hair salon next to the vacant store, told investigators that she entered the shop at around 11:30 p.m. one night during the weekend, since she'd forgotten her book inside. She heard some activity happening in the store next door, but didn't think much of it at the time, and only after hearing about the robbery did she realize that she must have heard the robbers digging their tunnel. Investigators at the time stated that whoever was responsible for digging the tunnel must have had experience as a miner, since they clearly knew what they were doing. Timber was used to keep the tunnel from collapsing, and despite the store where it was bought being identified, the person who bought it never was. In the months that followed, a composite sketch of one of the robbers was created, since he was seen while renting the store. Several miners who worked with a man named John believed that the sketch looked uncannily like him, and furthermore, he lived on Nightingale Street. The men never reported this to the authorities, since John was working at the time of the robbery and was seen by several people at the mine. They've also maintained that he was too civilized of a person to have committed a robbery. Another man, known only as A. Vandermerve, also has a theory of his own. At the time, he was working for a repo company, and he was asked to get a vehicle from a nearby town. When he arrived, no one was at the address, and he was told by neighbors that the owner hadn't been around for a few days. He was left with no other option than to enter the property unassisted. Upon entering the house, he was surprised to find several expensive watches inside, along with mining struts, pickaxes, and lights that were found in the house's garage. Most incriminating, though, was a blueprint of the standard bank branch that was also found in the garage. The missing vehicle was eventually found in Johannesburg, loaded with a mound of soil. The prevailing theory is that the robbers fled the country shortly after committing the heist, and it remains one of South Africa's most compelling mysteries that will likely never be solved. The murder of Zinanza, the son of a Hittite king, is a mystery that has plagued Egyptologists for a very long time. And today we're no closer to learning what happened to him after he lost his life while traveling to Egypt to marry a queen. Another mystery from the same time concerns a woman named Dakamunzu. What we do know is that she's mentioned on several occasions in a series of letters, known as the Amarna letters, that tell of Egypt's relations with Babylonia, Palestine, Cyprus, Syria, and other countries during the late 18th dynasty. Her name is mostly mentioned regarding an event that came to be known as the Zenanza Affair, which involves a young girl named Ankhesenamun. She was the daughter of Nefertiti, who was queen at the time, and the pharaoh Akhenaten. Shortly after celebrating her 13th birthday, Ankhesenamun married King Tut, who also served as pharaoh until he passed away at the age of 18. This meant that Ankhesenamun had to look for a new husband, and of course many older men showed interest, since they stood to gain not only a lot of wealth but also power. But Ankhesenamun wanted her bloodline to remain loyal, and in a desperate attempt she wrote to the king of the Hittites, who was seen as one of her most feared enemies. The letter reads, quote, "My husband has died and I have no son. They say about you that you have many sons. You might give me one of your sons to become my husband. I would not wish to take one of my subjects as a husband. I am afraid." It's been suggested that Ankhesenamun wrote this letter under a pseudonym that meant the great king's wife, rather than her actual name, but this has never been proven. The king understandably found the letter suspicious, so he sent an envoy to confirm the author's claims, and when he realized the letter had been sent by Ankhesenamun, he agreed to send his son, Zenanza, to Egypt to marry her. This meant that he would be crowned a pharaoh, and that Egypt and the Hittite Empire would become one. It was a win-win situation, but the marriage would never happen, as Zenanza was ambushed while on his way to Egypt, and his life was ended. The first suspect was a man named A, who was crowned as a new pharaoh. Abe denied any involvement, but the king could not be convinced, and he ordered an attack on Egyptian settlements in Syria. Some of the people who were taken as prisoners were, unbeknownst to the king, very ill, and upon being brought back to his native Hattusa, started spreading whatever disease they were suffering from. This led to an epidemic breaking out, and many people, including the king, lost their lives. Ankhesenamun was now forced to marry A against her will, but shortly after doing so, she suddenly disappeared. Historians state that she passed away under suspicious circumstances between 1325 and 1321 BC, and it's been suggested that her life was ended by the order of the pharaoh A. It's also speculated that Ankhesenamun was responsible for ending Zenanza's life, but this has also never been confirmed. We have no idea how Zenanza perished, or who the culprit was in his demise. Likewise, we can only speculate as to what happened to Ankhesenamun after she disappeared, and she's now referred to as Egypt's lost princess, and a mystery that will likely endure for centuries to come. Joseph Headley, also known as Joe the Quilter, lost his life to murder on the 3rd of January 1826, and the crime remains an unsolved mystery almost 2 centuries later, as no one was ever charged with the crime. At the time, Joe was living in Warden, a parish in Northumberland, England, though he often traveled around the country looking for quilting work whenever he could find it. His work had become known in several parts of England, since he was said to be a remarkable quilter, but that night he met a grisly end. According to witnesses, Joe had visited Warwick Grange, where he bought a pitcher of milk, a pound of sugar, and some meat from a woman named Mrs. Colbeck, who was the wife of a farmer. A man named William Herdman would later tell the police that he stopped in at Joe's place on his way home from work at a paper mill at around 6 p.m., and that Joe was in the middle of cooking a dinner consisting of a few potatoes. He spoke to a woman named Mrs. Biggs at 7 p.m. after she knocked on his door to ask for directions to Four Stones. She'd gotten lost in the pitch darkness while traveling from Stamfordham, but Joe was more than willing to send her in the right direction. By all accounts, this was the last time that Joe was seen alive. A man named Mr. Smith recalled riding past Joe's cottage at about 8 p.m., and that the place was completely dark and silent. When Joe didn't emerge from his cottage for a few days, his neighbors grew concerned, and when they investigated, they found what looked like biological material in the snow outside his door. When he didn't answer their knocks, they broke into the college and were shocked to find the walls covered in biological material, and that a quilt in the building had a handprint on it that also contained some material. The items that he bought earlier that day were still on his kitchen table, but it was a storage building that a horrific discovery was made in. Here, they found Joe deceased, and it was immediately obvious that he'd been brutally attacked by at least 2 people. When the cottage was searched, it was discovered that 2 silver tablespoons, 4 teaspoons, and 2 salt cellars were missing. Biological material was found throughout the cottage, and several pieces of furniture were strewn about, suggesting that a lengthy struggle had taken place. Defensive marks on Joe's hand suggested that he fought back valiantly, but ultimately came off the worse. It was ultimately suggested that he managed to flee the cottage, but that his attackers caught up with him at the storage shed. No suspects were ever identified, despite a small piece of a coat being found in a nearby hedge, along with a pair of clogs, and eventually the cottage and the remaining furniture were sold, leaving Joe the Quilter's case an unsolved historical mystery that contains far more questions than answers. In the summer of 1693, yellow fever was an issue all across Eastern American cities. The disease ran rampant through Boston, and theories as to where it came from began to arise. Some physicians began to theorize that mosquitoes were responsible for transmitting the disease. The yellow fever mosquito theory was only put to the test once a large outbreak occurred in New Orleans. But instead of just gaining some confirmation as to where the disease was coming from, history got a lot more than it bargained for. The outbreak in New Orleans revealed just how terrible the disease could get. Victims suffered from high fevers, jaundice, and violent spew-ups. The disease would ultimately become responsible for many social structures, but it was also found to contribute to famous legends, including that of the vampire. As the disease gripped its victims, they suffered from jaundicing, which led to the sensitivity to daylight. As the body shriveled and weakened, patients began to look gaunt. Their gum lines receded, making it appear as though they had unusually long teeth. The takeover of the epidemic led to large percentages of the New Orleans population being wiped out, eventually earning it the name Necropolis City. As the disease progressed, the internal makeup of patients was placed under attack. Vital fluid was mixed in the spew. It also ran from their eyes, nose, and ears, sometimes even their toes. The once healthy patients now looked vastly different, like living corpses. This also led to some outlandish conclusions, paired with a poor understanding of viruses and diseases. While the mosquito transmission theory was the most plausible, many sought a more supernatural explanation. This prompted the creation of vampire legends that have been carried through the times. The hemorrhaging that patients experienced led to the idea that vampires were responsible for the disease. The end stages of yellow fever contributed to and supported the vampire hysteria of the 1800s. As news traveled to other areas, legends of vampirism sparked along the Mississippi too. But it wasn't just the living effects of the disease that led to such conclusions. During this time, residents began to report strange noises that were emitting from the graves of the deceased. Some even claimed that the soil appeared to be disturbed. The claims prompted the reopening of burial grounds. According to historical sources, when coffins were opened, the corpses looked warm, blushed, and swollen. Today we know that this is part of the regular decomposition process, but this wasn't so widely understood in the 1800s. For this reason, the natural process was rather viewed as something supernatural and vampiristic in nature. It was also thought that not all vampires left their graves, but their foul vapor did. Many thought that the miasma could also carry the disease, again affecting the public. To protect themselves from the miasma, residents would use garlic or something similar to ward off dangerous vapors. The decision would also lend itself to vampire mythology and the use of garlic to deter them. It was 1807, a time during which Napoleon Bonaparte was at the peak of his power. The French Empire and Imperial Russia were engaged in quite a war, which he sought to put a stop to. That year, the treaties of Tilsit came into existence, and without hesitation, the successful general signed it, ending the disruptive war. He was revered as one of the greatest military commanders, with battles and ambitions that shaped Western Europe. Napoleon was undefeated until it came to that fateful day of signing the treaty. It was a joyous day for Russia and the French, and it couldn't go without celebration. Napoleon decided that a day of rabbit hunting would be festive enough and sent his chief of staff, Alexander Berthier, to oversee its planning. Instead of collecting wild rabbits, which would have taken too long to sort out on such short notice, Alexander headed to the local farm and acquired well over 3,000 rabbits, all of whom were tame. The docile nature would allow the commander and others invited to the party to have plenty of bunnies at their disposal without them escaping into the nearby shrubbery. The planning was quick, and things began taking shape on a large open field. Guests were arriving, and the rabbits were placed in cages at the edges of the patch, waiting for the man of the hour. Napoleon arrived at the event in his carriage, expecting a day filled with fun. Little did anyone know that the hunter was about to become the hunted. The moment he stepped from his carriage, the thousands of rabbits were released. The small creatures immediately rampaged toward Napoleon and onlookers who stood nearby. These domestic animals were not scared of humans at all. In fact, they believed it was feeding time. Hundreds of rabbits latched onto the unsuspecting commander, who desperately tried to fling them off. In search of their food, they nipped at his legs, and according to a historian, David Chandler, it appeared as though the bunnies had taken a sort of strategy to successfully overthrow the party. They had divided into two equal parts, half of whom flanked the French leader, and the other half tormented the guests. Initially, the onslaught appeared comical and many laughed at their behavior, but the rabbits were out for revenge. Expressions of fear soon replaced the smiles, and giggles waned into screams of terror as the swarm of bunnies brought the men to their knees. In desperation, the terrorized onlookers and guards attempted to repel them with riding crops, sticks, and whips, but nothing seemed to deter them. Napoleon was unable to accurately position his firearm to end the uprising and was short just a couple thousand slugs. The only other option was to retreat, and the commander did just that. He ran past crying guests and screaming men as he sought the solace of his imperial coach. But even as Napoleon clambered into his seat, the rabbits still did not relent, and some even managed to make their way inside. Napoleon was humiliated by the events that had just taken place, only regaining composure once he was far away from the chaos, and after having to toss some of the hungry beasts out the window. Eventually, the thousands of rabbits began to scatter. It turned out that they hadn't been fed that day and just wanted their next meal. It was the 26th of September, 1983, a day that could have meant the end of the world. In the early morning hours amid the Cold War, when relations between the US and Soviet Union were severely strained, an engineer and lieutenant colonel of the Soviet Air Defense Force, Stanislav Petrov, was on duty at the command center. Petrov sat at the Serpukhov 15 bunker near Moscow, watching for signs of impending nuclear missile attacks. A satellite was equipped with an early warning network that would notify the officer if a strike was incoming. Such a warning would be received. The officer on duty was expecting to send the information up the chain of command, informing superiors of the impending attack against the Soviets, in which a case of immediate counterattack, also of nuclear nature, would be launched back at the United States. So in the early hours of the morning, just after midnight, the bunker's computer whirred, and a siren howled the warning that a ballistic missile was heading straight for the Soviet Union. The system was incredibly reliable. There was no doubt that doom was on its way. But Petrov just sat there, staring blankly at the red backlit screen, with the word launch staring right back at him. A minute went by and the siren sounded again. It warned of a second incoming missile. It was shortly followed by a third, then a fourth, and finally a fifth. The screens changed their alerts to missile strike, but still Petrov sat there. The phone he would use to reach his superiors was within reachable distance, but he didn't even look at it. The lieutenant believed that the 5 blaring signals were nothing but a false alarm, so he waited. There was no rule that stated how long the attending officer would have to wait before reporting an impending strike. Petrov, though, knew that every second that he said nothing took away valuable time. He just hoped that he was right about the false alarm. Alongside Petrov, there were other Soviet Union experts, including IT specialists, who'd also been watching America's nuclear forces. A group of satellite operators got a hold of the officer and reported that no missiles were registering on the radar. But they were only a support device, and protocol stipulated that decisions needed to be made based on computer readings. The ultimate decision of what to do next rested solely with Petrov, the on-duty officer. He'd grown suspicious of the incoming missiles since the alert was so clear and strong. There were 29 other security levels that the detection would have to pass through. It just seemed impossible under these circumstances that the alert was so incredibly clear. Petrov finally picked up the phone and called an officer at the Soviet Army headquarters. But instead of reporting an incoming attack, he stated there was a system malfunction. If he was wrong though, the first impact would happen minutes later. But 23 minutes passed and there was no earth-shattering collision, and the officer could breathe a sigh of relief. If Petrov had followed protocol and allowed for a counter-launch, the results would have been catastrophic. The 26th of September, 1983, is forever marked as the day that the world almost ended. The Middle Ages was a time characterized by turmoil, a period during which society was faced with many challenges. The challenges took on various forms, including that of prevalent disease. Among these were dysentery, malaria, smallpox, leprosy, typhoid, flu, and diphtheria. Each disease, of course, carried its burdens, but none were as terrifying as St. Anthony's, which was also named Holy Fire or Internal Fire. The disease was notorious not just for the gruesome, unending symptoms, but also for the fear that surrounded it. The illness, a result of ergot poisoning, was characterized by some truly alarming manifestations. Patients exhibited signs of madness, physical pain, and psychological distress. Since there weren't many advancements in medications at the time, St. Anthony's Fire went untreated throughout the ordeal. This would result in the restriction of vital fluid flow, which gave way to excruciating burning sensations as gangrene began to gnaw away at its victims' extremities, ultimately leading to the detachment of fingers and toes. Sufferers of St. Anthony's Fire found themselves grappling with strange hallucinations, agitation, and spasms. Other severe symptoms included muscle cramps, nausea, insomnia, and convulsions, all of which began to take a toll on the ailing patients. It's widely believed that the symptoms are what led to the phenomenon of dancing epidemics or dancing plagues of the 14th and 17th centuries. The rise in fatalities and victims of the disease related to St. Anthony's Fire made for a grim picture of medieval society that was forced to battle an invisible army. While they didn't know it at the time, the disease had some unexpected roots. It was the direct consequence of bread consumption, a staple resource and the cheapest source of sustenance at the time. As populations rose all over the world, rye grain became a crucial source of food. The grain was used to make flour for bread. Little did they know that the increase in grains led to the growth of toxic fungus known as ergot. Unsuspecting victims would consume their baked goods, only to become fatally ill. Still, no one knew that this is what was causing St. Anthony's Fire, even though ergot was known to many. The continuous consumption of contaminated rye led to several more outbreaks, and communities were left in despair. It wasn't until many years later, in 1596, that a German physician named Wendelin Thelius made a breakthrough. He linked ergot to rye and subsequently to the terrifying illness that had plagued the world for years. With the absence of an understanding of viruses and bacteria, many people attributed the symptoms to divine punishment. The church sought to provide a reason behind the suffering and arrived at the conclusion that it was the result of sin. The outbreaks of the disease continued over the years with the constant consumption of infected food. The cycle persisted, leading to alarming fatalities. The disease was named after St. Anthony, who gave away all of his possessions to the poor. He then retreated into the desert area in Egypt and lived in solitude from 286 to 304 CE. While there, he lived as a monk and battled a struggle against the devil. The disease was named after him when it was suggested that the terrible illness could only be cured if the sufferer prayed to St. Anthony. The fire part of the name comes from the intense burning sensations that the patients would suffer, making them feel as though they were engulfed in flames. The Sea of Cortez lies host to hundreds of islands. A small strip leading from mainland Mexico connects to a particular island said to be the most mysterious and most dangerous of them all. Tiburon Island is only accessible through that small strip during low tide. Surrounding it is a wild sea that led to the nickname Little Hell. Tiburon once found itself the home of the indigenous group called the Seri. They were first and resisted both the Spanish and Mexican takeovers, defending themselves and their land with violence. But as more ranchers relocated to the area, the population of the Seri began to dwindle. By 1850, there was just a small number of them left. The group was rounded up and moved, but was later transported back to the island in a dedicated preservation area built by the government. It wasn't until 1975, though, that they were awarded exclusive rights to the channel by the Mexican government. During the time that the Seri occupied the island, many strange things began happening there. Disappearances and lost expeditions became the notable legends of Tiburon Island. One such event was that of the Grindel expedition. In 1903, Thomas Grindel, an Arizona prospector, made way for the island. When he arrived there, he merely skirted its edges to see if the island was worth a full-scale prospecting operation. After declaring that it was, Grindel headed back to Arizona and began recruiting men who would accompany him on his journey back to Tiburon. There weren't many takers, and in the end, the prospector was only able to get 3 men on board. Together, Grindel, Gus Allender Rawls, D. Ingram, and Jack Hoffman set out on the 10th of June in 1905, accompanied by their guide Dolores Valenzuela. The group traveled light, taking with them the materials for a distillery since fresh water would be a scarce commodity. The expedition would last 2 months, with the promise of being back home by the coming August. The Papago guide led the group through the desert area on the way to the main island. A single donkey carrying all of the stored water trotted along with them. The water, though, would be a complete waste, since the distillery attempt was a failure. With this setback, the guide no longer wanted to continue on the journey, and the rash decision to split up was made. Dolores headed back the way he came, and the remaining men started looking for a boat to take them to Tiburon. August had come and gone, and the men still had not returned. 4 months later, blackened by the sun, an incoherent and exhausted Hoffman emerged in Guaymas. He traveled many miles from the island to make it there, but he was alone. Initially, everyone thought that the group had been the victim of the Seri, who were believed to be cannibalistic. The only survivor of the Grindel expedition testified that the men had succumbed to the elements and had suffered from dehydration, not at the hands of the native people. Grindel's brother, Edward, wanted to locate his brother and figure out what happened to the party, so he set out too on the same venture. When Edward arrived at the town where his brother's expedition had left, he was told by hunters that a group of Americans had their lives taken on the island. The Seri were said to tie up their captives to stakes or driftwood, only taking them piece by piece. But Edward refused to believe that this was his brother's fate and insisted that the group of Americans was not the Grindel expedition. Following in his brother's footsteps eventually led Edward to artifacts belonging to his brother, one of which was Grindel's book, a rifle, and the mule that carried the cans of water. But no bodies were ever found on this search party. Ingram, Grindel, and Rawls were gone. Strangely, the guide Dolores was also never located. 2 years went by, and eventually the remains of Grindel were uncovered, but the rest of the crew, aside from Hoffman, remained missing. In the end, Hoffman became the only confirmed survivor of the Grindel expedition. In 1862, amid the American Civil War, a major battle took place. It was the most violent of them all, one that stained the ground of Pittsburgh. It was the Battle of Shiloh, where 2 Union armies came together to defeat the Confederate Army of Mississippi. The conflict saw 25,000 Union and Confederate soldiers perish. As night came in on the 7th of April, the remaining wounded soldiers, some of whom were still stranded on the muddy battlefield, began to notice something strange. The open slashes, or weeping wounds, were glowing. It was a faint green-blue light emitting from their injuries as they awaited rescue. This event certainly scared the soldiers and the medical assistants who later came to their aid. As the wounded men began flooding into the facilities, a strange pattern began to emerge. The glowing wounds were cleaned and dressed, and doctors soon realized that those whose injuries emitted light had a better healing time. The recovery was much quicker, with minimal post-op complications. Even though the physicians were perplexed at what they were seeing, they found that the glow was also preventing infections. The radiant lacerations were attributed to the mercy of angels, which led to the name Angel's Glow. The phenomenon, though, would be overlooked as a myth. Historians believe that the documentation of this strange event was nothing more than an exaggeration. Some even suggested that the soldiers may have been hallucinating, or just spitting out another tale of war. But what historians, experts, and scientists soon learned was that the incident was not exclusive to Shiloh. It appeared that Angel's glow had affected others on different battlefields as well, particularly where the wounded and deceased couldn't immediately be collected. The incident of the glowing wounds was left as a mystery to those of the era. They never knew why the wounds emitted an eerie light. Fast forward 150 years later, when high school student Bill Martin became fascinated with the subject. Bill, along with his mother, a microbiologist, and a friend, headed to the Shiloh battlefield in search of any clues that could explain the angel's glow. There, they discovered a bioluminescent bacteria and examined the environmental conditions to determine if the bacteria could have been present in 1862. It turned out that the bacteria was present during that time. But how did it get into the weeping wounds of soldiers? The bioluminescent bacteria were known to live inside soil nematodes. In fact, the two had a symbiotic relationship. The bacteria emit a light that attracts insects who would fall victim to the parasitic worms. Once they were inside the insect, the bacteria would be regurgitated, eliminating any toxic microbes. It's believed that while injured and lying on the muddy earth, the soldiers became contaminated with those very nematodes that released the bioluminescent bacteria. It was a quiet morning on the 18th of August in 1961. Fog hung in the air of Capitola, California, as some early rise residents began their morning routines. At 3 a.m., Frank Urbanek was already seated in the back seat of his friend's car. Frank was 18 years old at the time and awoke before dawn to grab breakfast before his 13-hour shift. His morning had been quite unremarkable until then. It was still dark out as Frank peered through the haze at the two-lane street only lit by headlights. Something strange was afoot. As he sat in the back seat, he could see hundreds upon hundreds of birds barreling out of the sky. They were sooty shearwaters. The seabirds were flying erratically through the streets while disgorging fish remnants. Many of them kamikazed into street lamps and rooftops. Residents, disturbed by the sounds of birds flailing their bodies onto their roofs, emerged from their homes armed with flashlights. But once the birds saw the lights, they immediately began barreling toward the homeowners. They retreated quickly and watched in terror from their windows. Still in the back seat, Frank was heading down the road. The birds lay piled thick in the road, and others were strewn across roofs, backyards, and on cars. It looked as though there were millions of them swarming like locusts. Some were still moving, but with a drunken sway, while others lay motionless. Eventually, the vehicle crossed Soquel Creek, and as Frank arrived at the coffee shop a quarter mile from his home, he found that the birds were there too. Here, the sooty shearwaters were far more restless and erratic. The owner of the coffee shop was baffled as to how relentless the birds were. He claimed that they'd been trying to get into the diner for hours. Later that morning, Frank headed to the docks where he worked. He was about to open the gates of the wharf as the sun was beginning to rise. Just then, one of the birds barreled toward him and began pecking at his leg. It was a strange event that left residents panicked and scientists stumped. The seemingly unprovoked migration led to jammed police switchboards as too many calls were being made. The Capitola police recounted at least 4,000 injured birds, with another 2,000 wobbling around and wailing. By 7 a.m. that morning, many of the sooty shearwaters had flown back out to sea, but it would take many days before the rest would take off. Red Cross arrived in Capitola as well, administering tetanus shots to those who'd been bitten or pecked by the erratic creatures. Even after undergoing several tests, what caused the behavior in the birds was a mystery, and it wasn't until 26 years later that a conclusion was finally met. The seafaring birds had consumed a toxin. A certain type of phytoplankton that produces a neurotoxin had moved up in the food chain. As infected sea creatures made their way to Monterey Bay, the sooty shearwaters began gobbling up many tasty morsels, inevitably infecting them with the same neurotoxin, domoic acid, that poisons the brain. Vampires were a major folklore legend that originated 1,000 years ago in Eastern Europe. The earliest written record of the fictional beasts came from 1047 in Old Russian and first appeared in English in 1731. Mostly, these written records would be detailing a fictional tale for entertainment, but important historical records exist regarding one particular individual. Jure Grando is the first ever real-life person to be described as a vampire. His story began in the late 1500s when he became a villager in the region of Istria, or modern-day Croatia. He was a peasant from the small village of Kringa, who, according to town records, had a wife named Ivana and two daughters, Anna and Nicola. In 1656, well into his life, Jura passed away from natural causes, leaving behind a widow and pure terror in his wake. Every night following his passing for the next 16 years, Jura would terrorize the good people of Kringa. In the middle of the night, he would wander the village, occasionally stopping to knock on a few doors. Residents would awake to the sound only to sink into a pit of despair. They knew what the knock meant. Someone in the household had very little time left. It appeared that if a door was knocked on, someone in the house would pass away in the next few days. Giorgio, a village priest who'd been the one to bury Jura, was the first to piece it together. He realized that the man had inexplicably returned from his grave only to wreak havoc on the town. Ivana would even report that the living corpse had appeared at her windows some nights. The locals began to refer to him as a mix between a warlock and a vampire. Armed with a crucifix, Father Giorgio encountered Jura during one of his nightly rampages. He brandished a cross at the man and ordered him to stop tormenting the villagers. Tears ran down the living corpse's face and he retreated into the darkness. But the resident didn't think that this was enough and chased after him. The group then attempted to pierce the man's heart with a hawthorn stick, but it simply bounced from his chest and Jura made an escape. The next night, 9 villagers came together along with Father Giorgio. They headed to the churchyard and uncovered the supposed vampire's coffin. As they opened the wooden box, they found the man lying awake, perfectly preserved with an eerie smile stretched across his face. Giorgio performed an exorcism and a stick was driven through his chest, but again it just bounced off. Another attempt was made and this time it was successful, and finally peace returned to Kringa. The legend of Jura Grendo was told to Johann Weikert von Valvassor, who visited the village on his travels. He researched it and recorded it in an anthology. In recent years, the story of the first real-life vampire has been examined by many scientists at the University of Zagreb, who believe that there must be a scientific explanation behind it all. Nestled in Wilder, Kentucky in the United States, one will find Bobby Mackey's Music World, a nightclub and far from average honky-tonk bar that's shrouded in pure eeriness. The site wasn't always fun-filled and a bustling attraction like we see it today. Its vibrant history has earned its spot in paranormal lore. It attracts not just country music lovers, but also thrill seekers and supernatural enthusiasts from all across the globe. The building's chilling history started in 1850 when it was being used as a small slaughterhouse at a meatpacking facility. The abattoir was constructed to serve northwestern Kentucky as well as Cincinnati, Ohio. In the lowest area of the building, a well was dug out to be used for waste storage. In the 1890s, the slaughterhouse closed down. Some researchers speculate that it became the place for satanic cult activity thereafter. During these secret meetings, it's thought that many sacrifices had taken place here. In 1896, the corpse of 22-year-old Pearl Bryna, a small-town girl from Greencastle, Indiana, was found less than 2 miles away. It was speculated that her boyfriend, Scott Jackson from Ohio, may have had ties to a local satanic cult. In the early part of the 20th century, the abandoned slaughterhouse was demolished, and the lot stood empty until the 1920s. A new building was erected and served as a casino and nightclub, as well as a speakeasy amid the Prohibition. When the Prohibition ended in 1933, an entrepreneur, Buck Brady, bought the property and named it Primrose Club. After more than a decade of running a successful nightclub, Primrose grabbed the attention of Cincinnati mobsters who attempted to muscle their way into the business. But Brady refused to sell the business, which only led to escalating violence and threats towards customers in the parking lot. Eventually, Brady left the scene and the mob overtook the place. It would later be renamed the Latin Quarter and became a rough and tumble club. In 1978, following a series of fatal attacks at the establishment, the authorities were forced to close it. That same year, country singer Bobby Mackey bought the building and turned it into the same music hall and tavern that stands today. But since its opening, the building has found itself terrorized by a paranormal presence. While Bobby himself was skeptical, he didn't doubt the word of his family, employees, patrons, and even police officers, each of whom had experienced some unexplainable activity there. Despite the aid of the clergy and psychic intervention, dark forces are said to still linger there. Some believe that the building's basement is a portal to hell, and the stairs nearby have been nicknamed the stairs that go to nowhere. A former caretaker who resided in the upstairs apartment alleged that he was demonically possessed and that an exorcism was performed on him in the club by a local minister. A patron also claimed to have experienced a suffocating heat and a scene involving a flying trash can. Bobby's wife was reportedly pushed down the stairs by a force that was said to resemble sketches of Alonzo Walling. She never set foot in the nightclub again. Jutting from the landscape of Granada, Spain, is a palace and fortress known as Alhambra. It was built between 1238 and 1358 upon a plateau overlooking the city of Granada during the Nasrid dynasty. Ordering the construction of Alhambra, Amar, the leader, had moved the royal residence to a new location, and it was here that Granada would enter its era of greatest artistic splendor. During the 14th century, after the completion of the two main towers, 3 Nasrid palaces were erected. This included the Mexwar, the Camaras, and the Lions. At the base of the plateau, there runs a deep ravine, the Darro River. The park situated outside is adorned by roses, oranges, and myrtles. The most characteristic feature surrounding Alhambra is the dense forest of English elms. There's no doubt that the palace is incredibly beautiful, making it a must-see tourist attraction. Even in the most well-known and incredible tourist sites, there lies a strange past that goes untold during tours. Writer José Manuel Frias decided that one peculiar event that took place continuously over the centuries could not go untold. Granada is known for its many mysteries, including the tunnels that lie beneath the fortress and the enigmatic carvings that have been found within. In his book Mysterious Granada, Jose recounts historical documentation that reached his research team. The mythical elf is a creature of legend and folklore, taking on various appearances and several descriptions. Alhambra found itself at the center of one such legend, a story that was built upon eyewitness testimonies that eventually reached the writer. In 1492, the Arabic civilization abandoned the fortress, hoping that they could one day return. Such hopes also appear to have been harbored by an alleged group of protective elves. It's said that this enigmatic group of elves was part of the Arabic tribes who hoped to reclaim the palace that they once called home. Information regarding such stories was chronicled in Granada Mysterious. The first historical report about the arrival of the elves dates back to the 2nd of January, 1792. Various inhabitants of Granada who lived near the palace reported seeing 7 goblins or elves dressed in brilliant white apparel, congregating in Alhambra. Together they cried out, disturbing the neighbors all night, supposedly reminiscing about the past. They stayed there throughout the evening, wailing with an attitude of vigil. They hoped that the prophecy of reclaiming their home would come true. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Alhambra had become neglected until it was occupied by Napoleon's French troops. During this period, the palace was almost destroyed. In 1870, it became state property and was declared a national monument. It seems that there are some forces, though, that want it back. As dawn drew in, the elves saw that nothing had changed, and so enveloped in misery, each went back to their origins. They promised to return each century in an effort to make Alhambra their home once more, and that they did. On the 2nd of January, 1892, they returned, again witnessed by neighbors and documented in written accounts. Many claim to have heard the muffled cries emitting from the palace, but again the elves were unsuccessful in reclaiming their home and departed. On the 2nd of January, 1992, white robes swayed into the fortress, again seen by onlookers, and congregated within the palace. They wailed and wept all evening. The sun rose, and they were off again. Every 2nd of January, once a century, every 100 years, ending in 92, the elves return to see if Alhambra has been returned to its rightful owners. Their next visit will be due in 2092, 66 years from now. It's said that they'll return again in hopes of regaining the place that they once called home, but were forced to abandon some 6 centuries ago. Imagine hearing about a town, and even knowing a few people that came from there, only to find out later that it supposedly never existed. This is exactly what happened to a small town that many people claim existed in Wisconsin, and today the debate ranges on whether it simply disappeared or ever existed at all. The town in question was called Dublin, and much like the town of Langville in Montana, many people have memories of not only hearing about it, but also visiting friends and relatives there at some point. It's said that Dublin existed in the heart of Wisconsin up until the 1990s, when it suddenly vanished from maps. Some people have suggested that the town may have simply changed its name, but no records exist of such a change being made. Even stranger is the fact that no records of Dublin seem to exist at all. No one has been able to find any property records, public officials who served there, census information, or the name of anyone who lived there in the past. Surely this means that the town never existed, and that its name is either a case of shared false memory or a hoax that someone created. This would be a logical assumption to make if it weren't for the fact that many people have proof that they visited that town. Several people have come forward, stating that they have distinct memories of visiting Dublin, and they've even shown off souvenirs, such as coffee mugs and t-shirts containing the town's name. This has led to many theories over the years as to what happened to the town, and why people believe so adamantly that it existed. The most obvious is that it's all a hoax, that the souvenirs that people own were created after the fact to keep the rumors alive. In fact, it would be very easy for someone to print a few t-shirts and mugs with Dublin printed on them, and then to claim that they bought these items while visiting a friend or relative who lived there. Another theory that's been put forward is that the town disappeared thanks to an earthquake that resulted in a massive sinkhole opening up, which then swallowed the entire town. But once a sinkhole opens up, it doesn't usually close up again of its own accord, and hence it would still be present at the supposed site of Dublin today, which it isn't. It's also been suggested that the town was washed away thanks to flooding caused by large-scale damming that took place in Wisconsin at one point. At the time, many dams burst their banks, and some people feel it's possible that the town was completely destroyed by one of these incidents. If this were the case, it would have resulted in the loss of hundreds, if not thousands of lives, and there's no record anywhere of such a tragedy. But there is one theory that's so outlandish that most people refuse to even consider it. Some people who believe Dublin existed think that it may still be in the same spot that it's always been, but it's been rendered invisible by unknown forces. Most people, though, accept the theory that its existence is merely a hoax, and that Dublin never existed in the first place. Missing people mysteries are among the most popular on the internet, likely because many of these cases contain clues, such as the missing person's last known whereabouts, but that isn't enough to bring the case to a close. The case of 24-year-old Barbara McClure is no different, as her family and friends are still trying to come to terms with the fact that she's been missing without a trace for decades, and that they're no closer to learning what happened to her. In November of 1978, Barbara was living in Seattle, Washington, and on the night of the 2nd of November, she went out on a night out with a few of her friends. The group traveled to a restaurant called the Sirloin, and inside they also attended a disco called the Fandango. But at one point in the night, Barbara and one of her friends ended up getting into an argument, and she decided to leave. According to her friends, she opted to walk home rather than ask for a ride, and she was never seen again. To make matters worse, she had a 2-year-old daughter named Stoopy at home, and she grew up getting to know her mother through only the stories that her family could tell her. She's always been told that Barbara loved her very much and that she was a confident and loving person. According to the case file, some of Barbara's friends left the club right after she did, and they managed to find her with one of their cars. They then drove alongside her, trying to get her in, but she refused, saying that she would rather walk. 6 days after she went missing, a group of workers were conducting maintenance on a road and found her driver's license lying at the intersection of I-5 and I-405, just a short distance from the city of Bothell. This has raised many questions in the investigation. It's been suggested that Barbara may have thrown her license out of a car window after being abducted, that she accidentally dropped it while still walking, or that it may have been placed there by someone who wanted it to be found. Her family is of the opinion that the license was placed there intentionally, and that the person who left it there harmed Barbara in some way. But there's one detail in the case that has come to light recently, and it's left her daughter baffled. She stated that she had information that Barbara was being followed in the days before her disappearance, but she has no idea who this person was, other than that they were hired to do this. Detectives, on the other hand, claim that no such person ever existed, and that this is merely a rumor that has no basis in reality. Barbara's house was 5 miles from the Sirloin restaurant, a distance that she would normally have covered without any issues, and hence it's believed she either met with foul play or decided to leave of her own accord. The last time that she was seen, Barbara was wearing a green and rust-colored blouse with stripes, a black leather jacket, corduroy pants, and tan boots, and she was also carrying a brown purse that's never been found. She has brown hair, blue eyes, and may be using a different last name, such as Anderson. If you have any useful information on this case, you're asked to contact the Keene County Sheriff's Office at 206-205-7887. For centuries, there's been a debate and speculation as to whether a remarkable book, the Book of Thoth, really existed, since the person who possesses it would gain remarkable powers that most of us would only dream of. Thoth is the ancient Egyptian god of writing and knowledge. He's said to have written this book himself, and that it contains a collection of some very important texts, but many believe it's merely a legend and that it never existed to begin with. The reason for the debate is the fact that the Book of Thoth is mentioned on several occasions in different papyri from the time, which is said to be from the 2nd century of the Ptolemaic period. That would mean that it was likely created sometime between 200 and 100 BC. It's mentioned in the text for the first time in the Tours Papyrus, which was published in the latter part of the 18th century. In this text, it said that someone attempted to end the pharaoh's life using spells from the Book of Thoth, but they were unsuccessful. The book also has a very interesting story connected to it. It's said that a man named Neferkaptah had no interest in other people, animals, or anything other than the ancient writings that he loved to study. He would spend most of his days reading through these texts that he found on papyri or on the walls of the many temples that he used to visit. It's said that one day he became so obsessed with these writings while at a temple that he forgot to pray and hence had forgotten about the gods for a minute. He only came to his senses when he heard a priest laughing at him, and when asked for an explanation, the priest explained that he'd been reading a set of useless inscriptions and that if he wanted to read something more interesting, he could direct him to the location of the Book of Thoth. He explained that the book contained all the known magic in the world, and that if he read even just a few pages, he would be able to talk to animals, return to the land of the living after he passed away, and even be able to see all of the celestial bodies in the sky with his naked eye at any given time. The priest told him that if Neferkaptah was willing to pay for his funeral with 100 silver pieces, he would give him a clue to the book's location. He obliged and paid the money, after which he was given the following clue. It read, quote, "The book is at Koptos in the middle of the river. In the middle of the river is an iron box. In the iron box is a bronze box. In the bronze box is a wood box. In the wood box is an ivory and ebony box. In the ivory and ebony box is a silver box. In the silver box is a gold box, and in the gold box is the Book of Thoth. Round about the great iron box are snakes and scorpions and all manner of crawling things, and above all there's a snake that no man can kill. These are set to guard the Book of Thoth." Neferkaptah set out on a long journey and eventually found the book. He learned all of its spells and became a powerful mage, but Thoth learned that the book had been stolen and swore revenge. In the end, Neferkaptah, his wife, and his son all lost their lives in the river. He was buried with the same honor as a king, and the book was buried beside him, never to be seen again. Whether this book actually existed or not is a matter of debate, but most scholars believe that it's merely a tale of fiction told by people who were alive at that time. Archaeology is a very interesting field that teaches us about civilizations that lived long ago, the beliefs that they held, the food they ate, the clothes they wore, and the way they lived their everyday lives. These facts are gleaned from artifacts that are found across the world, but some of these finds provide us with more questions than answers, such as the discovery of the Lunas Decalog stone, which was found in Albuquerque, New Mexico. While there are many stories of the stone existing before then, the first records we have of the stone were made by an archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, Frank Hibben, in 1933. What makes the stone so intriguing is the fact that it has all of the 10 commandments from the Bible written on it. As for its age, some people believe it may date back as many as 2,000 years, while others think it's probably only about 500 years old. Hibben stated that he was taken by a guide to the site where the stone was discovered, and that he had to remove lichen and other debris from it before he could read it. This has been disputed though, since Hibben has a somewhat soiled record when it comes to his findings. On more than one occasion, he was caught changing data to make his finds look more impressive. On one occasion, he claimed to have discovered a cave showing that people lived there 25,000 years ago. But subsequent studies showed that the site was only about 14,000 years old. The script on the stone is of Paleo-Hebrew origin, and the stone itself is carved out of basalt. Many different scholars have studied the stone and its text, and they found some very interesting points. Some of the Hebrew lettering was substituted with Greek letters. Some of the Hebrew letters and symbols are known to have been used during the Middle Ages, leading some scholars to believe that it is nowhere near as ancient as Hibben claimed. It also contains several spelling errors, such as the fact that the author mistakenly added a symbol that they believed should be read as one sound, when it actually should be written as two separate sounds. Thanks to these errors, many archaeologists and scientists are skeptical about the stone's authenticity, since the text is seen as sacred, and if written by an ancient Hebrew, these errors would have never been present. But it is possible that the text was written by someone whose first language was Greek rather than Hebrew, and that these errors were honest mistakes that went unnoticed at the time. Most of us are familiar with some of the most famous navigators in history, such as Christopher Columbus, Francis Drake, Marco Polo, Lewis and Clark, and David Livingstone, all of whom had a major impact on our knowledge of the world. But there is one navigator that very few people have heard of, and some believe that he may have made one of the most important discoveries of all time: the location of the Americas, as far back as the 6th century. Brendan the Navigator was born in Ireland in the late 5th century, at a time when the Irish were just starting to accept Christianity. He was deeply influenced by the Christian faith as well as his Celtic culture, and when he turned 6 years old, he was sent to a monastery where he furthered his religious education. He remained there for the next 20 years, and when he turned 26, he was ordained as a priest. He then traveled across the country, gathering as much knowledge as he could, including stories of Irishmen who'd sailed across the sea in the past, discovering lands that no one had seen or heard of before. In time, he came to be regarded as an important Christian leader, but he decided to spread the message even further, and he traveled to Wales, Scotland, and France to do so. It's said that his teachings in these areas were instrumental in spreading Irish monastic ideals. He would undertake one of these journeys once every 7 years, and on one occasion, he felt inspired by a monk named Berenthus, who told him of an idyllic place called the Land of Promise of the Saints that he had once visited. Brendan decided that he needed to see this land for himself, and after receiving a vision from an angel, his mind was made up. He was certain that he could find it, and along with a number of his fellow monks, he set sail on a small leather boat, and for the next 7 years, they searched the seas. In his account of the journey, he stated that he visited many different islands where he met strange people. He also claimed to have had several harrowing encounters with sea monsters and birds that could sing songs. On one occasion, he claims to have met several demons on a desolate, rocky island. On another occasion, according to his account, they decided to make landfall on a small island since it was Easter and they wanted to celebrate the holiday. But soon after getting off their boat, the island started to move, and they were shocked to realize that they'd accidentally landed on a massive sea turtle. After years of exploration, the party finally found what they were looking for. They described the Land of Promise as one filled with lush vegetation, plenty of fruit to eat, and precious stones that they easily unearthed. The group stayed in that area for a short while, but according to Brendan, he was then told by an angel that they needed to return to Ireland and that they needed to take as much of the fruit and stones with them as they could. Once back in Ireland, he told his fellow monks of the incredible journey, and the account was written down in a text that translates to The Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. Many people believe that the entire journey never took place, and that Brendan either fabricated it, or it was a tale written by an unknown author. But others believe that the Land of Promise may be the Americas, and that Brendan found it long before Columbus or the Vikings ever did. The Eleusinian Mysteries of ancient Greece were a series of religious rituals that were not only considered to be very secretive, but that promised its practitioners a better afterlife once they were initiated. These rituals were carried out for a millennium and are thought to have ended around 329 CE. In September every year, a festival would be held starting in the town of Eleusis, which lies close to Athens, and it would last for several days. During the festival, people would recount the story of Demeter and Persephone, her daughter. Demeter, who was the goddess of agriculture, became distressed when her daughter Kore went missing. She neglected the earth and everything that grew on it, but when Zeus discovered that Kore had been abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, he ordered that she be returned to her mother. But this was no longer possible. According to legend, anyone who eats anything while in the underworld can never return, and Kore had accepted a single pomegranate seed from Hades, which she then ingested. Hence, she could only spend 6 months with Demeter, but had to remain in the underworld for the rest of each year. She then became the goddess of the dead and was renamed Persephone, after which she married Hades. This is where the Eleusinian mysteries have their origins. It's said that while Demeter was searching for Kore, she disguised herself as a human and visited Eleusis. She was given a job as a nurse, and in return she revealed her true identity, sharing these sacred rituals with the Eleusinian people, which then became the Eleusinian mysteries. It took 9 days before Demeter finally found out what happened to Kore, and so the rite takes 9 days to complete, but this must be done by each initiate in complete secrecy. The first 5 days are used for purification, sacrifices that are made to Demeter, and fasting. On the 5th day, they would make their way to Demeter's sanctuary, but they'd be given no instructions upon their arrival. This leaves them confused, just as Demeter was while searching for her daughter. When this stage is completed, the initiates would enter Demeter's temple. It was large enough to accommodate thousands of the initiates, and what happened once they entered was meant to be the most secret part of the rituals. Each person was given a drink, which usually was made with herbs and water, though some scholars speculate that it may have contained a hallucinogen of some kind, but this has never been proven. The rest of the rituals remain a secret, though it's thought that the priests and priestesses entered a small room where they were shown certain visions. These visions were then recounted to the initiates, many of whom described being terrified, and after the fact having no more fear of death. On the 9th day, the initiates would leave the building and walk back to Athens, where the festival would be brought to a close. These rites were first mentioned in the 8th century BC by a poet called Hesiod. Thanks to the secrecy surrounding the Eleusinian mysteries, not much is known about what happens inside the temple, and many scholars find it remarkable that these rites have been kept a secret for so many centuries. Codex of Rohonc is an ancient manuscript that has mystified scholars since its discovery in 1838, and in the long years that followed, many attempts have been made to find out who wrote it and what its contents mean. The codex was discovered in medieval times, but when it was studied, it was found to contain what looked like outdated Hungarian writing, only no one could understand what any of the words meant. The 448 pages in the manuscript are written from right to left, and the characters resemble that of Old Hungarian writings, but are far enough removed from those to be indecipherable. It was also compared to Hindi, but it was also too dissimilar to be read. The symbols used on the pages are so numerous that they outnumbered the letters of any known alphabet tenfold. Further confounding scholars is the fact that each of the 448 pages is watermarked with a symbol that resembles an anchor inside of a circle. Strangely, the watermarks are thought to have been added later on, since they've been dated back to around 1530 AD. This has led to speculation that the original codex has been lost, and that the one that was discovered was transcribed from that original. Then there are the baffling illustrations that have been found on these mysterious pages. The book contains 87 in all, including depictions of religious figures from Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism. Some of the other illustrations seem to depict military battles that took place long ago, and landscapes that the author may have visited while writing the text. It has hence been suggested that the writer may have lived in an area where these three religions were openly practiced alongside one another. When it comes to deciphering the text, there have been many difficulties. The first seems rudimentary, but poses a real problem as scholars are uncertain which language the author used, or based their writings on, and hence they don't know whether it should be read from left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or the inverse. One theory is known as the Old Hungarian alphabet hypothesis, which suggests that it's describing topics from the Bible's New Testament, but no proof has ever been presented that this is the case. If the text is based on Indian Brahmi script, it should be read from top to bottom. One scholar, Mahesh Kumar Singh, claims that he translated one of the texts based on this theory, and that the Codex is a retelling of the Gospel. He claims that it then contains a thoughtful prologue and stories from Jesus' years as an infant. Most scholars have refuted this claim, though, and cite Singh's claims to be a hoax. Another theory holds that it's meant to be read from right to left and top to bottom, but this theory has never been proven. Lastly, one scholar believes that the book should be turned upside down before being read, and that the text is of Sumerian origin. But once again, this theory has many inconsistencies and has failed to definitively translate any of the strange words in the book, since it requires the reader to move some of the symbols around. The author, meaning, and origins of the Codex remain a mystery for now, but efforts are still ongoing to decipher it. If this is ever done, it could teach us more about our ancient past, or it could hold no significance whatsoever. Stumbling across a message in a bottle seems like a romantic notion that's usually only seen in the movies, but there have been a few instances where people have found these objects years after they were cast into the ocean. One such message was thrown from an ill-fated British ship, the Lusitania, as it was about to disappear under the waves during the First World War. The ship was owned by the Cunard Steamship Line Shipping Company, and it made its first voyage on the 7th of June 1906. When the war broke out, German forces sent out a warning that people should refrain from traveling on British passenger ships, since they would be sunk by German submarines. They suspected that these passenger ships were being used to transport supplies to the British, and hence they could not be allowed to pass. At the time, the Lusitania was making regular trips between New York and Liverpool in England. But on the 7th of May, 1915, it encountered a German U-boat and was immediately fired upon. According to witnesses, they heard two massive explosions. The first was attributed to the torpedo that hit the ship, but no one was certain what caused the second. German officers took this to mean it was caused by munitions that were on board, thereby justifying their actions. In the minutes that followed, passengers on the ship started to panic, and they raced to find a way off the liner. 761 people were rescued from the water, but many more lost their lives, either due to the explosion or in the water after the fact. Just 18 minutes after the explosion, the Lusitania sank below the waves and was lost. When word of this heinous act reached the public, they demanded that the US declare war against Germany, since many of those who perished were from America. The US would enter the war 2 years later, and German U-boats were now required to warn passenger ships before firing on them. The sinking of the Lusitania was even used in US military recruitment posters that read, "Remember the Lusitania." The incident is still spoken about today as a good example of the horrors that come with wartime, since many innocent people who had nothing to do with the conflict lost their lives needlessly. When it comes to historical murder mysteries, the case of Donna Daugherty isn't one that immediately springs to mind, but it's a fascinating mystery that has left investigators baffled for decades, thanks to some of the bizarre details it contains. The year was 1970, when Donna was 21 years old. She was friends with a woman, also named Donna, though they had different last names. Donna Daugherty was in the midst of her studies at the Northern Illinois University. She had ambitions of becoming a teacher and at the time was studying Russian. When she wasn't in class or her room, she was located on West Lincoln Highway, where she worked at Swen Parson Library for extra money. On the 2nd of October that year, she made plans with the other Donna, and they were meant to meet up at the library. They'd not seen each other since June, when the second Donna got married, and by all accounts they were excited to catch up. Since they both had time that evening, they arranged for a walk and a cup of coffee when Donna finished her shift at the library. But when her friend arrived, she realized Donna wasn't there. She waited for about 20 minutes, but when Donna still didn't show up, she assumed that she'd simply been delayed somehow and couldn't make it. But when her fellow students realized on Sunday that they hadn't seen Donna for 2 days, they became concerned. When they checked her time card at the library, they found that she left at 9:59 on Friday night, but never made it back to her lodgings. They started to panic and filed a missing person report on Sunday, the 4th of October. When investigators searched Donna's room, they found that her clothes were still there, as well as her suitcase and her last paycheck that had not been cashed yet. Her family felt that something sinister had happened, but the police felt otherwise, since they learned that she was in a relationship with a man who lived in Pittsburgh. They believed she'd simply left the campus to visit him, and that she'd likely be back on Monday. They felt that she kept this relationship a secret, since the man was either still married or recently separated, something that Donna's parents would never have approved of. For the next week, no one heard from the missing woman, and on the 11th of October, 3 people were on their way to a party when they stopped to pick up beers that they'd hidden in a cornfield. Here, they found Donna deceased, and they reported their find to the police. The area had been searched before, but the search ended about a quarter mile from the spot where she was found. The only pieces of Donna's clothing that were missing were her shoes, though she was dressed in a different jacket from the one that she was last seen wearing. The shoes, her coat, and her purse have never been located. It was later determined that she'd lost her life due to suffocation. She had no marks on her body, which is usually a good indicator that she knew the person who ended her life. But there was one detail that no one was able to explain. Donna had eaten as much as 6 pounds of potatoes before she lost her life. A man named Charles Burke later became a suspect. He and Donna had been in a relationship, but she told the other Donna that she was considering ending things between them, since he wasn't a very good person. He was eventually cleared, and to this day, Donna's attacker and her strange last meal remains a mystery that may never be solved. Charles refused to comment on the case, and we may never know if he was the one who truly ended her life that night. There's no doubt that our climate can be very delicate, and that any major natural disaster could have a massive impact on how we live our lives. Floods displace millions of people every year. Earthquakes wreak havoc all over the world, and in some cases, these result in tsunamis that claim even more lives. But there is one such disaster that arguably dwarfs all of these. While these events can be devastating, one event that took place in 536 resulted in that year being named the worst time to have been alive in all of history. That year, people were left baffled by a strange fog that started to cover a massive area, including the Middle East, much of Europe, and parts of Asia. According to some accounts, the fog was so thick that the sun was unable to shine through it, and most days it seemed as though it was being eclipsed by the moon. In a very short time, temperatures started to plummet. The resulting cold claimed many lives, but the worst was yet to come. Since the sun's rays were unable to reach the earth, crops started to die, leaving thousands of people without food, and before long they began to starve. Notes from the historian Procopius state that the sun shone, but offered no heat since it was permanently obscured behind the fog. He added that this gave way to attacks, disease, and famine, all of which claimed many lives. A Roman politician, Cassiodorus, wrote that he and his friends were amazed by the fact that they could no longer see their own shadows, even at noon, and that the seasons no longer had any meaning under a waning sun that he described as bluish in color. For many years, these accounts were taken with a grain of salt, since they seemed almost too fantastical to be true. But in the 1990s, scientists studied tree rings from trees in Ireland, and what they found surprised them. They discovered that the temperatures in Asia and Europe were about 36 degrees Fahrenheit colder than normal during the summer, and that the reports showed snow falling in China during their summer, and soon researchers were able to find the cause. It's now known that the fog was caused by one, or possibly several, massive volcanic eruptions that spewed huge amounts of ash into the Earth's atmosphere. This resulted in what's now referred to as the Late Antique Little Ice Age. Possibly the worst time for anyone to be alive in Europe and the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. After the eruptions, there was no sunshine for 18 months, which must have been an utterly terrifying ordeal for people who were alive at the time, especially since they would have no idea what was causing the mysterious fog. It was quite literally one of the darkest periods in all of human history, caused by the eruption of a volcano, or volcanoes that lay thousands of miles away from the people that were the most affected.